Just an announcement, the meeting will beginning in about 10 minutes or so. They're all doing other things. They're going to take a quick break, so in about 10 minutes. Don't time me. Madam Mayor, we're live.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this Tuesday, May 22nd, City Commission Budget Work Session number 1, the first of many. And ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Mayor Pam Triolo,
Here?
Vice Mayor Andy Amoroso.
Here.
Commissioner Scott Maxwell,
Here.
Commissioner Omari Hardy,
Here.
Commissioner Herman Robinson.
Here.
If everyone would please rise for the pledge, led by Commissioner Hardy.
Allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and
justice for all.
Okay, City Attorney, would you like to start us off, please?
City attorney's not.
Oh, I'm sorry, City Manager, excuse me.
I play an attorney on TV.
Sorry for the delay, everyone, too. We had a work session that went long, so forgive me.
Madam Mayor, Commissioners, thank you very much. We've talked many times over the years since I've been here, and probably before I got here, about the importance of the staff and the people that work at the city, that they're very much the lifeblood that makes this organization work, and in many ways has been at the key points of what we've been experiencing as we transition into that wonderful city we know we can be. And we value and appreciate the employees. One of the issues we've had to grapple with is how do we position ourselves in a marketplace that, as people have improved at accelerated rates around us in this marketplace, how do we properly pay a fair day's pay for a fair day's work in this market? And it's hard to do that, as you know, without really good, competent data. We were fortunate enough to hire a consultant, Katie Bush, who's here with us tonight from HRCC, who's going to walk you through a comprehensive study that she has conducted to put our employees into competitive pay ranges and pay classifications. And so without any further ado, I'll go ahead and have Katie take over and start her presentation.
Thank you. Good evening. How are you all today?
Very good, thank you.
Okay, excellent. We have the next hour together where we're going to review quite a few different pieces of information. I'm just going to take one moment to just point out what those pieces are and make sure that you have them in the proper order, okay? The audience also has this information, so I think this would be helpful. So the first piece is a copy of the presentation that we'll go over. That's number 1. And at the back of that, you'll find a copy of the pay plan and the city pay plan in terms of our proposed ranges. So that's in your packet number 1. Then going to legal size paper, the next thing we'll refer to is the IBEW bargaining unit jobs. That's the first legal size paper with more of the shaded colors or the muted colors at the top. You get out your glasses, you should be able to read this one single piece of paper, which talks about the different options in terms of cost and breaks that out by union. And then number 4 would be the more brightly colored employee report, which you'll notice at the upper right-hand corner says employees under minimum. And then the very last page says EEs over maximum. So when I'm referring to the different handouts, I'll try to pull them up so that you all can follow along as well. Okay, the materials are up here in the front if someone wants to grab them and pass them out. Thank you so much.
Vanna White.
So this evening, we're going to cover a overview of the compensation and classification study that we performed as part of the work that another consultant did. They started that years ago, and I want to share with you the exact steps in the process that we went through in order to take that study across the finish line, and of course make sure that the pay ranges themselves and the market data has been updated to 2018. It's unusual. I've actually been in this profession for quite a few years. I've had the opportunity to work with many different agencies in the public sector across the United States and with different consultants using different methodologies. So I was in a position to be able to pick up from the previous consultant the work that they did and follow along with those common standard techniques that compensation consultants use as they develop pay structures, to see where they left off and maybe where some of their concerns were, and then also to pick up and to augment and fill in some of the holes to follow and finish the rest of this work for the city. I wanted to walk you through what that project looked like. So, and I'm thankful that I'm here with you today in person because I often talk with my hands, and you can actually see now that I'm talking with my hands. When we talk about a classification and compensation program, we're talking about two main pieces of a puzzle that we need to bring together. And so the classification piece is about job information. It's about the relationship of positions in the organization. As I said earlier, I've been doing this kind of work for cities, counties, and state agencies across the United States for over 20 years. And even though you might be in the same business as other cities, you have some unique services that you provide here in the city of Lake Worth. And every organization is organized or structured or staffed differently. So we want to make sure that we understand the internal relationships between positions and how jobs fit together in each organization that we visit. We then look to the labor market data, which is the right-hand side of that puzzle, and we look to see what's being paid in the surrounding labor market. And for the most part, and I'll talk more specifically about this, we looked at cities and the county in Palm Beach County, those organizations that we compete with for similar talent. Now, in the case of the electric department, and I'll get into specifics, we needed to go a little bit broader because, as you know, not everyone around us provides those same kinds of services. So we'll talk specifically about that as well. So we looked internally at job information. We looked at the evaluation of requested changes or realignments that had occurred since the last time the consultant had done the work. We looked at the salary survey data that they had available, and we identified some areas where we could add additional survey data to validate or augment the data so that we could create those proposed pay ranges. We did create a completely new structure for the organization. And so those proposed ranges I'm going to share with you tonight and walk you through how those were developed. Once we have the pay ranges and the city commission approves those pay ranges, then we can look at what we do in terms of implementation. Now, of course, we've got some ideas, and I wanted to give you some ballparks in terms of options and costs as you go through your budgetary decisions. So thank goodness the Rubik's Cube has made a comeback because everyone now knows what that means, right? So if you think about a Rubik's Cube and trying to get one side to be blue and the other side to be green, as we turn the Rubik's Cube, all of the colors shift. And so in a way, when we talk about implementing a new pay plan, we have to think about the Rubik's Cube because we have all of these competing priorities. So the pay plan itself should be a minimum pay that is attractive, that will position us in the labor market so that when people are applying for jobs, they see what we're offering and they say, hey, I might want to go work there. We want to make sure that maximum pay is also high enough so that the folks that we have here see that they have the opportunity for pay growth over time. We also want to make sure that we have career progression opportunities. So not only where do I fit today within the city's pay plan, but what are my options? What are my opportunities to stay here in a location that I love, working with the people that I think are great, providing value to the citizens? What other options do I have in this organization for career progression? So we want to make sure that the pay plan supports that folks can see where their possible movements are. And then, of course, we have to be fiscally responsible. We have to make sure that that pay plan as part of our overall total rewards philosophy fits. So this evening, we're talking about base pay. But as you know, there are other things like benefits, time off, different reward and recognition options that we have. So we have all of these things that we need to balance in a pay plan. And most importantly, we want to make sure that we're giving managers really, really good guidance to be able to figure out what they need to pay to be competitive, to be able to attract that talent, to be able to reward folks, and to be able to retain the best, especially as you continue to raise the bar and implement strategic initiatives. So our overview, we were asked specifically to look at each of the positions and assess whether or not their movement to a new pay grade, including job title changes and reclassifications, made sense. We were asked to look at the salary survey data and use that as an assessment to validate the proposed ranges. We went ahead and added in additional survey data from the local PEPI survey, which is where all of our local governments get together and match jobs and make sure that they're providing pay information that is comparable. We also used a survey source that we have called Comp Analyst. What that allows us to do is to look at a broader labor market, to look at the education, nonprofit, government sector, as well as the private sector data for various positions that you have, where the private sector may actually be where you're getting people from. So we need to know where that data, what's being paid for those positions. And because you're in a unique position of offering your own electric service, it was obviously paramount that we understand what was being paid in the electric world in terms of from the public power salary survey, as well as other organizations in the state of Florida, and I'll show you which ones we surveyed, that offer electric services. So the other thing that we wanted to look at too was whether or not it was feasible for full-time staff. So for full-time staff, was it feasible to raise our starting rate to $15 an hour? And I'll cut to the chase. I actually was very pleased that we found out that it was not that expensive to raise the starting rate for folks to $15 an hour for full-time staff. Okay, so for full-time staff to raise the rate to $15 an hour, that was in the market competitive ranges that we found. So that's some good news with this plan. Just as a reminder, remember when I was talking about the left-hand side and I was talking about classification? So we're not talking about people and their performance or how well someone does their job. We're talking about what the skill sets are necessary to perform that job and what others in the labor market are paying for that skill set. So things like the kind of work they do, the analysis that they perform, the communications that they have with customers, the impact of their decisions, different kinds of education, training, and experience that might be required for a position. So once we look inside the organization and understand, we're then in a better position to look outside and look at what the current market conditions are and create a pay plan that is going to work for you, balancing recruitment, attraction, and motivation and retention. So we have all of those Rubik's Cube things to keep in the back of our mind as we're looking at the labor market data and building a pay plan that works for you. Just to be more specific here in terms of the data from Comp Analyst, just to be very clear, so while we are looking at different industries, we are looking at employers of similar size, and we are looking location-wise in the West Palm Beach metro area. So we're not looking at San Francisco or New York City. We're looking at organizations around where we are. Same thing with the American Public Power Association. Now that does represent nonprofit or community-owned electric utilities, but we specifically looked at data for the ones that were similar in size to you, not only in the number of customers you provide, but also to in terms of revenue. So the scope or the compensation philosophy is that you should look at organizations that are in and around where you are competing for talent. Let me just point out about the IBEW, that's the International Brotherhood of Electric Workers. The pay plan that is represents about 76 different kinds of jobs in the city. And we did look at electric positions. There are about 5 benchmark positions that are really key in all of the electric services. So for example, lineman position is a very consistent position in any organization. Remember earlier how I said organizations are structured differently, but that one's a really, really good benchmark. And so we looked at Clewiston and Gainesville, Jacksonville, Lakeland, Ocala, et cetera, these different organizations to see what they were paying. And then we also looked at water and sewer positions because those are also in that pay plan. So you've got water, sewer, and electric. So when we look at the pay plan for IBEW, and now I'm going to ask y'all to turn to this number 2, which is the first legal size paper that you should have. It's 5 pages long. The shaded muted colors up at the top. It says IBW bargaining unit jobs. So if you'll notice that this is sorted from high to low based on minimum pay. So all of these jobs in here are in basically 3 major departments: the water, sewer, and the electric. As you can imagine, they have relationships between each other. So jobs, for example, in the treatment plant might start out as a water treatment plant operator, C, B, and then A. That's their career progression. In the electric department, you have apprentice positions and lineman positions that all have relationships to each other. So the first place we started was looking at the survey maximum, the average maximum pay for lineman positions. And we use that as a really strong benchmark amongst all the benchmarks for that pay plan, and made a recommendation as how much to shift that pay range. So you see over here on the far right-hand side in yellow where it says percentage shift to current to proposed.
We don't have color on our sheets.
It's
Ah.
super duper light.
Oh, is
Super
it?
duper light, far right-hand side.
Okay.
Last 2 columns over there on the right, percentage shift of current to proposed. The first one is the minimum and the second one is the maximum. So that basically means that we multiplied or shifted the 2016 minimum rate by 8%. I'm just reading the top line there. And the 2016 maximum rate by 8% to get closer to the labor market data for these positions. Now, this is about jobs, not people. So we're recommending that the pay range for that position shift and move to a more competitive rate. Now, you will notice as you flip through here, if you quickly go through on the far right-hand side, you'll notice that the ranges shift by 8%, 6%. Keep going, you'll find a 3% in there and a 5% as well. So we're not recommending that you take the entire structure and shift it by the same percentage. We're recommending that you look at the key benchmark jobs for each of the various sets of functional areas in that particular pay plan, and that you shift those ranges based on the market data for those particular positions. So that's why you'll see on the far right-hand side those different recommendations. Any questions about that concept? Okay. Let me just share with you if I could. So we're going to dig in just a little bit deeper here. So here's an example of the electric job titles. These are the benchmark positions. The thing that differs about what you're looking at in this large piece of paper and what you see on the screen is that there's additional information on the screen. Bless you. The market reference point for minimum and maximum is added there as a point of reference. And so that helps you to see how we got to our recommendations. We do, remember what our electric market is, though. Remember how broad that is, that it includes data from the Public Power Association. That's national data. Now it's scoped down based on our customer size and our revenue size. And then think about in terms of the state of Florida and the number of agencies that we use for the electric benchmarks. It goes all the way from the Keys all the way up to Jacksonville. Yes, sir?
Commissioner Hardy?
We don't have that on our sheet. Those
It's on your first handout.
In this presentation, slide 11.
do we have that for every job in this IBEW bargaining unit job?
So we only survey for benchmark positions. We don't survey for every single position. And these are the benchmarks specifically associated with electric. On the next page, you'll see those associated with water and sewer. On slide number 12, I'll show you as an example. So in compensation consulting, it's one of the things that people always think, well, there's got to be an exact market match out there for every single job. There's a lot of data out there. There really is. But remember, we have to take a look at the data in totality. So we want to make sure that we are looking at valid information whose variances amongst what other cities are offering or what the data points are offering isn't too large. So we don't survey for every single position. We survey for what we call benchmark positions. And that's the data that we know is really good. So for example, like an IBEW, the lineman position is an absolute benchmark because every organization has that. And that's what we want. We want that good data. So in terms of water and sewer, and it's almost as if you saw this presentation, benchmarks, they're right there. That is defined well enough that organizations agree what that job is. Obviously, it has to represent many different levels within the organization. So we want to make sure that we have benchmarks, not just in electric and water and sewer, but that we have them throughout the city at different levels within the organization, from the lowest levels to the highest levels. Now, are we going to find exact matches? No. But we are going to find 70% or more of the skill sets of what we're looking for in terms of what we expect people to do here will be similar to what's performed in other organizations. So in addition to the lineman as that example, here's some other ones that are non-IBEW examples. And you see there's trade positions, leisure positions, there's an IT job up there, supervisory position, customer service, code, refuse collector. Those jobs is just an example of what serve as good benchmark positions. And keep in mind too, not everybody, offers all of these services exactly the way we do, but if there was enough data in the set to feel comfortable, then we were able to use it to make a pay decision or pay recommendation. So what do we do with all that information? So we take all of that information, and thank goodness we have a computer system that helps us to analyze all of that data. Because what we're looking at is not only what others are offering for a particular job, but what they're offering in terms of relationships between the positions. We are looking at the benchmark positions, and then if we don't have benchmark data, we need to figure out how do we recommend a pay range if there's no market data. Or it goes back to the left-hand side. The very thing we did in the very beginning was to understand the organizations and to understand those internal relationships. So if you understand that a job is here at a level 1, a level 2, and a level 3, you don't necessarily need market data for the level 1 and 3 if you've got great market data for the level 2. That's just a very simple example of how we recommend pay ranges to an organization. So speaking of pay ranges, the ranges that we're recommending, if you want to see what they look like for the city, if you go back to this presentation, in the very back, you will find a picture that looks like this. This is just a quick synopsis. You'll have this in the very back of your presentation.
Job list with pay ranges.
At the top, it's called New Pay Info. And then then the next pages after that is job list with pay ranges. So this is the city's pay plan for the non-IBEW jobs. So this is all the other positions at the city. And what you see here on the left-hand side is a job code, current job title, the department that it's in. We're only looking at full-time positions. You might see under proposed job title some changes to job titles that we're recommending that the city consider. And then after that, you'll see proposed grade and then minimum, midpoint, and maximum. Might be on the white. So after all of the analysis, the pay ranges that we're recommending are these ranges here on the right-hand side. So for example, those jobs in pay grade 1, the refuse collector would start out at $31,200 and go to a maximum of $46,800. So that puts that position in a market competitive position.
Oh, Commissioner Amoruso. Sorry, Vice Mayor.
How do you take into consideration longevity as far as somebody being here for a longer period of time? And the second part of that question is, for instance, we have quite a few executive assistants across the board in different departments, but they're all making different depending on, you know, over the years, some moved to certain departments because they knew they could make more in that department than where they were. We inherited a lot of that, but now you have, you know, 6 or 8 people that are in essence doing the same job, but they're making different pay. And as we do this recommendation, you might move them up, but they aren't necessarily moving up to be compatible with their other workers.
Okay. 2-part question, if I understood, and please correct me if I'm wrong, or we can reframe it. So the first question was related to longevity. So, and the question was, how do we take longevity into consideration when we're developing pay ranges? So interestingly enough, there's sort of like step 1 and step 2. So step 1 first is to develop the pay ranges based on the labor market data and the internal equity. So it's actually looking at skill sets, not necessarily at what your longevity practices are or how long folks have been in the job. We're looking at what the pay ranges are for that skill set in other organizations. So the minimum pay and the maximum pay. So we first develop the pay ranges based on what others are willing to pay for that job. So that's kind of step 1. Where longevity comes into play is what you as an organization choose to do in terms of people pay. So there's the jobs, and then there's what we pay people within the range. So that's the answer on longevity. In essence, it's not taken into consideration as we're developing pay ranges for jobs. That's step 1. Step 2 is your question about the executive assistants. We try not to look at the way your organization was before and more of the way it is now. So I can tell you that all of the executive assistants happen to be assigned to pay grade 11. Don't ask me how I know that, but I'm pretty sure if you double check, they're all in pay grade 11, save the one that reports to the city manager. So often we will see that that particular position is in a higher pay grade, and that the executive assistants that report to other department heads are in the same pay grade. Because as you said, their work is comparable. It's different, of course, functionally in the areas that they support and the executives that they support, but the pay range itself and that skill set and what we expect is the same of the job. Now, you're probably paying people in that range differently, and that is just the way it has been over time. So we're focused on setting the pay range for the job. And again, going back to the whole reason why we do this, to provide great pay guidance as managers make pay decisions about people going forward. Did that answer the second part?
I just,
Yeah, and I just wanted to follow up since
Sure.
you pinpointed something,
Mhm.
and I'll bring something up. So, for instance,
Mhm.
the executive secretary for the city manager
Mhm.
makes one pay,
Mhm.
which is higher than the executive assistant that works for us. Now,
Mhm.
it could be argued that our assistant works for 5 different people and is pulled in and is doing work for 5 different people.
Mhm.
Should that person not be paid the same? But when you go up in the scale,
Mhm.
she would still be below that
Mm-hmm.
position, still within the range, but still
Right.
below.
So 2 things. One is going back to the job level. So if there's a question about the internal equity of the executive assistant that supports the commission versus the executive assistant that supports the city manager, there's a process in place through human resources to have that position evaluated and reclassified. So that
And
is one
that's
option.
another question we need to have because we are working on that. We don't have that
Okay.
internal evaluation. We're, I mean, that was part of something I asked for years ago, and we're working through the process, and that's why we're here with
Gotcha.
you tonight.
Okay.
But we don't have that internal process at the moment
Okay.
to evaluate.
may I just follow up one thing on what he asked as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. When you talk about the valuation of a person in a specific position,
Mm-hmm.
okay. So say I was a widget maker in the county for 20 years, and I came here to make widgets,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm new.
Mm-hmm.
Would I be paid? Is my basis scored on being a 1-year employee of the city, or am I a 21-year employee in widget making?
So great question. And again, it's job versus person. So I'm going to take you back first to the job since the pay plan itself is about the job. So what is the value of widget making in Palm Beach County? And what should that pay range be for that particular skill set? So that's what we answered in terms of what was the pay range. The second piece that you've both piggybacked on is then what do we do in terms of pay administration relative to new hires and to existing employees, should they be promoted or their jobs be reclassified? So that other piece here, it's kind of like you have to clean your house before you can have a party. So we need to lay this foundation first before we can add on the other piece, which is that additional guidance of, hey, listen, when we're making a pay decision about someone who comes to the city with all of this experience, how do we go about valuing that experience that they got elsewhere? How much can we afford to spend on the training and the experience and the certifications and the knowledge that they bring to the table? Because if we're able to offer them above minimum pay, it's likely that they're going to be able to hit the ground running. They're going to be way more productive. They already understand the job function. They still have to understand Lake Worth, right? They still have to understand what our expectations are and how our things are structured and our processes. But they bring that body of knowledge to the table. What's the value of that? And how do we try to go about consistently, in an inconsistent world, making those pay decisions? So I think it sounds like, and I just wrote that down, by the way, in terms of, so there's one is job evaluation and the other one is people pay evaluation, like compensation administration guidelines.
I just know how in other organizations, in other professional organizations, they do. We've been so concerned with getting our own employees to the right place financially that, and I know that some new hires have occurred in the years that we've been, or I've been here. And I know that sometimes used as an evaluation. I just want to sort of see what, if it weighs heavier or how it's actually weighed into the system.
Well, ideally, once you implement a new pay plan and you level set your current employee population into that new pay plan, then you're in a better position to make those pay decisions about folks coming in from the outside.
Okay, sure.
Sir.
Yeah, I guess so. It's clear to me that we've like gone about, I guess, redefining, these job descriptions, or figuring out what these different jobs are, and then mapping these jobs to these different salary ranges that we're also redefining based on what the market's saying, and that's kind of the decision that we're kind of looking at here. But I guess where individuals not like where people fall within those pay ranges is, I guess, an administrative decision. And so the question that I have for my colleagues is, to what extent do we want to be involved in making or shaping the set of considerations that Mr. Bornstein, Mr. Ruiz, and different department managers are going to be looking at when they decide where individuals fall in those pay ranges?
We're not. We're setting policy.
Commissioner Robinson?
I thought we were just setting policy, not getting involved in management.
I'm setting policy.
So after we decide on these ranges, we don't want to have anything to do with where individuals will fall in those ranges. We don't want to know anything about how management will decide. Like, that question is not about what these pay ranges are, but how does Mr. Bornstein or a department manager figure out where someone falls in that pay range? So we don't want anything to do, we don't want to know anything about how Mr. Bornstein or any other manager for the city of Lake Worth makes that decision, or do we want to know how he makes that decision?
I think we're choosing to find out how he makes that decision, and that becomes our policy, and then it's enacted. Did you want to respond?
The personnel policies and procedures that we would use through HR, we can provide some clarification and guidance to help give you an understanding of how we would be looking at an employee coming from the outside with certain competency levels, or if an employee is here for a period of 3 to 5 years, they should be proficient in somewhere in the range, and how that would be, how they would move through that range. All the time understanding that as hopefully markets change and adjust, we're moving these overall ranges to adjust to keep us relevant in the market. But that's something we could bring back to you with some overarching guidelines. I want to avoid having some kind of formulaic that's very specific.
Okay.
It kind of.
Well, there's certifications, there's performance levels, there's, all the different ways people, increase their salary levels, or there's.
And if I could just add, the last piece was eventually it would be really good to get to a way of focusing on people who perform above the minimums. That's another way you can move people in a range. Those folks that are extra go-getters should also be recognized, because we would really like to create a high-performing organization eventually, and figuring out how to pay for performance is another option for us, but that's not something we fleshed out.
But within the confines, though, of these three scenarios, though, right?
It would be in these ranges, correct?
In the range.
Yes.
Right, and I guess, my question is, we're providing you a pretty we will provide you a pretty well-defined structure in the form of mapping these jobs to these different pay ranges. And I guess the question is, do we want to just trust that you're going to color in that framework in, a way that makes sense and does all that? Or are we going to want to see, well, what color are you going to choose to go into? You know what I'm saying? We've given you the outline. Do we want to also ask you, so how are you going to shade this in, I guess is my question. Not to dictate to him how he's going to do it, but I think it's worth looking at.
We'll be able to see it every year in the budget process, because everything is going to be itemized. So we'll be able to see each item and each salary in the budget process to know whether or not the decisions that we created are falling within the parameters of those three different pay areas.
I
mean, if you have a question about an employee, or if an employee comes to you or something of that nature, that we would have to bring with HR in and city manager or whatever, because we don't direct staff. I mean, we can give them a policy level and a pay range. Did you have a follow-up?
No, we can just, again, this is the first step. It is a monumental step for us to get to this level of an arrangement. But we always viewed this as the first step to get us into those other issues. And the personnel policies will give us some clarification, and that will be brought back to you.
Vice Mayor?
And I just wanted to piggyback on that. I know HR is working on the policies and procedures and the benchmarks and the qualifications. And I've asked, we never had it before, but I've asked for it to be spelled out. So we know clearly what the city manager and or people that are hiring these people. So when an employee does come to us and say X, Y, and Z, we can say, well, it's clearly written out in these policies and procedures, but we haven't had that before. So, like the city manager said, it kind of all goes together, but I'd like to see those policies and procedures, those benchmarks, so it is clear that an employee coming in knows exactly. And if they go above and beyond, there's a clear method why this person didn't get it and this person did.
And I think because this is budget work session one, something to keep in mind, and I want to share that too with the people at home and the people that are listening and watching, is that we have been waiting for this comp and class study for a long time. In fact, I've been asking for it since I got here 6.5 years ago.
yes.
Every single budget process that we've been through, that we've been here, we have had to talk about, decide, budget, and negotiate without this information. And, when we came in, I mean, you guys, we've had this conversation before. This is no surprise to anybody, but, we had employees saying they hadn't had raises in 8 years and 7 years and whatever. We came in and we made decisions based on the available funds that we had in the budget and what we thought we were able to do when money started to come in, because we were nearly bankrupt 6.5 years ago practically. But we were figuring things out and we were trying to play. So as we grew, we've been able to do those things. Now we have solid work, which I am very grateful for, and to everyone who's here who's worked on this, to be able to do that. Now it's time to use comp and class to make sure that, as the city manager said earlier, we are hiring, bringing in, enticing, retaining people that want to be here within the organization, and people being compensated in a way that they're appreciated and they're respected and they're being paid confidently what they can expect in the market rate. We don't want our loyal and best to go other places. We want them to find a home here forever, as long as they're happy and taken care of. So this is important knowledge. I'm very happy to have this information going into the start of this budget process. It takes a long time to do it, but this is welcome information. And before we finish out the reports, I want to thank everybody, Mike and everybody, for doing this. It gives us a good starting point, a good place to go. And now we've got the numbers, so I'm grateful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. You want to continue?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
So just as an example here, the proposed city pay framework, the full one is in your handout. This is just to give you an example. So the question is, so now we've answered the question, what does a market competitive pay plan look like? So now we've got that in terms of the jobs, right? So we've got proposed pay ranges, that are market competitive. And the good news is, knock on wood, that most employee pay does fit within the ranges. But as you can imagine, since the pay plan itself hasn't been updated for quite a few years, that there are individuals who will need adjustments to get their pay to the minimum of the proposed ranges.
Commissioner Robinson, did you have a question?
Well, just in terms of policy, I was interested in the part-time people, at, you know, are they part-time at 15 hours a week or 39 hours a week? You know, what's the cutoff? And you know, at what point do we want, if they're part-time, do we want to consider outsourcing or full-time versus not paying somebody less than $15 an hour
Lauren, did you have
as a moral issue?
Is this on? I'm not sure. Part-time is under 30,
30 people,
under
No.
30 hours.
30, okay,
And that's an average over a full year. So usually we like to keep our part-time employees around 25 hours a week or under.
and they would be working during the day or at night or, you know,
Depending on the position, most of our positions are during the day.
okay.
Commissioner Amoruso?
I just wanted to comment on this since Commissioner Robinson brought it up. So we have 68 people that are making less than $15 an hour, and we have 35 part-time people. Now, when I brought this up originally, and I think Commissioner Robinson did also, I was looking at raising, what did it look like to raise all of our 68 people to $15 an hour? Because I know originally when we went to so many people part-time, it was because we were saving the benefits. So it made sense to me that all 68, what did all 68 look like, bringing them up to $15 an hour, because they're not getting the benefits on the other side. So that was kind of what I was looking for. I know that you got the information based on just the 35,
The full-time folks.
the full-time.
Right.
So, you know, that's kind of a change that I personally would like to see, because, you know, that means a lot. And a lot of those part-time people become full-time people. I know that a lot of our maintenance guys downtown, they came in as maintenance and then they went on to our garbage trucks, and, you know, I've seen them escalate through the system, and that's kind of what we want in our job performance. We want them to, you know, move through the system and stay with us and move to a full-time position.
We can absolutely, we can adjust the numbers. Katie and I can work together on that. Be glad to.
Well, at what point,
Commissioner Robinson?
I'm sorry, but at what point do we even consider outsourcing these part-time jobs? I don't know what they are, but the idea of not, you know, we go on about demographics in our city and then expect somebody to be working, you know, 30 hours a week and live on less than $15 an hour. It's hypocritical.
The outsourcing option for our part-time positions has not been presented to me, so right now it's not being considered.
Well, as a policy, I think I'd like to talk about it in terms of living wage, and that's,
I just want,
I don't know.
and some jobs, some people like to work part-time. So, I mean, some people, it's convenient for their lifestyle to have a part-time job, so not everybody wants to work full-time.
And we have plenty of people working for our organization still making less than minimum wage that have been with our organization for a couple of years.
Oh,
In
there's some that are.
Several in our organization making under minimum wage that have been full-time, making $9 an hour or whatever.
But I'd be glad to come back with those numbers.
Let's address what we can first, the
Make a
full-time.
change to-
Yeah, I don't want to get into the weeds.
Commissioner Hardy?
Yep. What I'll say is that while I acknowledge that it is a step forward, that we're at least bringing our full-time hourly employees up to $15 an hour, I would like to say that we, as just as Commissioner Robinson and Commissioner Amoroso said, I think it would be a good thing for us to bring our part-time employees up to $15 an hour. And I get that some of them don't want to work full-time, but we can pay the ones who don't want to work full-time. You know, we can still at least try, make it a goal to pay them $15 an hour. You know, I think that would be helpful. I would echo Commissioner Robinson's comments about our demographic issues and about not wanting to contribute to them, because we cannot, out of one side of our mouth, look at our poverty map, right, and say that, you know, it's a bad thing that 9 out of our 11 census tracts are high poverty, and pay people wages that guarantee that they'll be impoverished. Some of these people live in the city, you know, so I would say that needs to be looked at.
I just want to, like, the pay plan that you're looking at is a first draft for at the beginning of a discussion. So if there are changes that you'd like to make, like incorporating the part-time people at $15 an hour, I'm glad to incorporate that. This is just to begin the discussion.
Yeah.
And then let's take a look at it, see what makes sense for the city and for our employees, and let's go from there.
And you know, I would say also from you know, my standpoint, I would rather us pay the 15 to the part-time than outsourcing, because when we outsource, we don't really know what they're paying the people, and if what we're trying to do is some moral good, then we should have some certainty about the good that we're doing, and that would mean paying the people we have under our roof the 15. So
I think we gotta find out how much money we have and get through the budget process before we can start promising money all around the block here.
Just a draft beginning for discussion.
Okay.
Absolutely, I can come back with some new numbers for you next time we talk about it.
We got a lot of
Thank you.
ways to go. Thank you.
So may I make 2 points of clarification?
Please.
So in terms of federal and state wage requirements for minimum wage, the city of Lake Worth is absolutely 100% in compliance with minimum wage.
That's,
I just want to make sure that was clear. The raising the starting rate to a living wage, that trend certainly is picking up in South Florida and across the nation. And in my experience in working with other cities, what I'd like to present you is some options of what that might look like to incrementally change that starting rate over time. And it could be possibly 3 years, just to kind of flesh that out, because I think when you do start seeing what the numbers are, I want to give you some options so that you know how much it costs. So as you're making those budgetary decisions, you can see where you can make those changes. Is that good? Okay. Just make a note right here, overtime. Okay. So speaking of, so now that we have this new pay plan, one of the things that we need to look at is what you might do and how much it might cost to implement the new plan. Now, technically, when you put in a new pay plan, the thing that you're required to do would be to adjust the compensation levels of those individuals whose current pay is less than your proposed minimum. So that's at a minimum, no pun intended, you want to increase the pay to the new proposed pay ranges. And I've given you some examples here. And if you get out your glasses and the color-coded single sheet of paper, I'm going to orient you to this as I describe the implementation option. So over on the left-hand side of this sheet of paper is a summary. And I'm going to, I actually have bigger slides here, so I'll walk you through those if it's easier to see on the screen. And then it's broken out by bargaining unit. So non-union, IBEW, PEU, and PMSA over here on the right-hand side. It is not broken out by fund, but that's certainly something that we would be able to provide to finance. This is only base pay, so this doesn't include what the impact might be for benefit contributions that are tied to changes in wages. So this is just looking
Does
at,
not include benefits.
does not include benefits.
I had that note. Thank you.
Right. And so that's something that as you continue through this budget cycle that finance would bring to you so that you have that fuller picture as you make those decisions. Okay. So on the far left-hand side, and there's 3 implementation options. Again, you've got to minimum, which is what we're calling option number 1. That's the bar all the way across the blue lines up at the top of your handout. The information in the middle is
I don't want people to be
option-
confused by minimum by saying the $15 we were just talking about. That's the pay grade, just to make sure when you're looking at these numbers, that's the minimum
of the proposed pay
of
ranges
the proposed
that
pay range
differ
of
for-
3.
Yeah, for every single pay range. Pay range 1 starts at $15 an hour, but pay range 2 is higher, pay range 3 is higher, et cetera.
Okay.
So right, we're talking about the proposed minimum of the pay ranges. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, sir.
could I?
Commissioner
This is a lot of alphabet soup. I know what IBEW stands for. Can we just get to, for example, PMSA?
Mm-hmm.
PMSA is the
Public
Managers Supervisors Association.
And public employees, union.
Okay.
Public managers and supervisors.
Okay, public managers and supervisors, and PEU is public employees. Okay.
So the bars up at the top and is option number 1, and then in the middle is option number 2. So option number 2 is one where we take everyone's current base pay, and the first thing we do is we increase that base pay by 2%. So the reason we would want to do this is we would want to increase everyone's pay by just a very, very conservative general market movement of 2%. So it scooches, everyone's pay would change. It would be 2% higher than it is today. That would be step 1. Now, step 2 in option number 2 is that there's folks whose pay is still below the minimum of the range. And so there's folks that would require a movement to minimum as well. So in option number 2, every employee, unless of course they're at or over the maximum of the proposed ranges, would get a 2% increase and then a change or adjustment to minimum.
What are the difference in dollars total across the board budget-wise?
In the difference between 1 and 2?
Mhm.
So you're talking about roughly for option number 1, 590,000 versus option number 2, which includes the 2% increase for all employees that are within range, is 836,000. So you're talking about almost an additional 226,000.
Okay, I wasn't
To-
sure that second one because of the different numbers where the first one is the same 590, so I wasn't
Mhm.
I was still on another 2%. Okay. So it's 964. The second one. The first one's 590 and the second
Mhm.
one's 964? Or you said 836.
836.
What's the 964? That's
Oh, down at the bottom.
we-
Oh, thank you.
that's what I just
Okay,
want to
let
make
me
sure.
get my glasses on. Hold on. It's like, where do you see that number? Here we are. Okay. Yes. So one of this is an alternative option. So if you first move to minimum and then give a 2%. So let me repeat that. So option number 2 is that you give the 2% across the board first, and then anyone who still needs an adjustment to minimum gets the adjustment to minimum.
Okay.
The tiny little option there where it says if move to minimum first and then give a 2%. So what the advantage of doing that is that you're implementing the new plan. You're moving all the employees to the minimum. If they're outside the range, you move them all to the minimum of the range first.
Mhm.
Then you give everyone a 2% increase. So these folks are already at minimum, and then they're scooched, professional term, scooched an additional 2% into the range. The thing that's great about that is that if you hire someone tomorrow, you're likely to bring them in at your new minimum in many cases, though we would like you to have a little flexibility there. But if you bring them at their new minimum, then someone who's already been here for a year, 2 years, 3 years is already at the new minimum and above. So the new people are coming in, they're not making as much as the person who's been here a while. So that is the 964.
But $100 and something $1,000 more
Yes.
budget-wise. Okay. Okay, and option 3? We just see the third one.
Then option number 3, do you see where she's looking at that?
I saw that. What?
You have a question about 2?
Yes. Could you just walk me? So, option 2 is 2% increase first, then move to the minimum. Could you just show me which part of that little chart there represents the 2% increase, and which part represents the increase to the minimum?
I can't in this particular chart because it's combined. So if you wanted me to break it out by 2% first and then,
That would be helpful to me. I mean, if it's a 2-step option, I would like to see the 2 steps
Sure.
broken down.
yeah. We can certainly do that for the next report.
Sure.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Well. Mr. Robinson, did you have a question?
No, I thought it was,
Okay. And option 3?
And then option 3, I like this one too. So this one is first we move everybody to minimum. So we implement that new plan. And then we adjust compensation of every employee based on how long they've been in their job. So not how long they've been with the city, but how long they've been in their position. So the thing that's neat about this implementation schedule is that now we have new pay ranges that are representative of the value of the job that they're in.
and their career of time that they've been doing their job.
in that job, right? So they may have been with the city. Say, for example, you've been in public works and you've worked your way up. So you may have been in a maintenance worker position, but you finally now have, for the last 5 years, you've been in the foreman position. So the pay ranges for the foreman position are now market competitive. And you've been in that job for 5 years. And it's a minor percentage point, and certainly we can run numbers to see what it looks like higher, but conservative Kate wanted to start with minimum. So 0.5%, just a half a percentage point for every year that they've been in the job. The foreman who's been in that position for 5 years is now going to get an increase further within this market competitive range that they're now into based on their time in the position. So the 5-year person in that position would get a larger increase, in this case 2.5%, versus someone who just became a foreman last year. They would only get a half a percentage point.
0.5% every year,
No, just for implementation purposes.
just for implementation. Vice Mayor?
Okay, so your recommendation would be 1, 2, 3. Over what period of time?
I would love to see as soon as possible, as in like the next budget year. Now, I realize
You'd like to
that's,
see 1, 2, and 3 in the next budget year.
oh no, you get to choose option number 1, option number 2, or
Two,
option number 3.
But you said at one point the option would be moving to minimum
That's
and then giving it 2%.
right. So option number 1 is
Minimum
just moving to minimum.
only. The option number 2 would be those.
So at a minimum, I would like to see the city do that.
Okay.
Now, if there were budgetary funds available and there was interest in level setting employees' pay now within these new pay ranges, A, option 2B, and option 3. And it depends on what your different methodologies.
Okay, and at one point, we had a conversation, and I believe it was Commissioner Maxwell that had brought it up. If we pull out certain employees, the top-heavy employees, and only go with, say employees under 100,000, because the conversation that we had was somebody that's making $9 an hour and somebody that's making $50 an hour, when you give them a 2% raise, it's a lot more up here than it is down here. And what do those numbers look like? Originally, we had the conversation when we first gave the raise, we needed to do it across the board because those supervisors were the ones that were finding us the money and working through it. Now we've given 4, now we need to, even it out. And it kind of goes with part of, some of those people are already where they need to be. And I'd also like to look and make sure that all those people are where they need to be, because I don't know that I'm looking, I pulled separate records of everyone that is over 100,000, everybody in the 80,000, and I'm trying to put them together to see. I don't have it laid out like you
I
presented.
was going to say, we can do that analysis for you a little bit easier.
Didn't
So-
we do that before, City Manager?
I don't think we actually put it alongside of each other.
No. Didn't in one of the years when we were doing the budget cycle ask the highest level employees
To not.
to not? So
Yeah,
we did-
there were, but, and again, I think most of the people that we're finding that are below the ranges. I don't
Oh
know
yeah,
if they-
none of them are anyone
Yeah,
well,
but-
that would be considered well compensated at all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the
So-
people that are under minimum, and in fact, you can look at the job titles here and the names. The are 9-10 pages worth of folks who are in,
Do we need to have the names in the reports? Do we need to have the names in the reports? I just find that sort of a little.
No, but it actually makes sense.
I mean, yeah. Well, they're already public records, so it doesn't matter for this purpose. But I would suggest next time not having the people's names, because I'm sure not everybody feels comfortable having their names listed with their coworkers and people knowing about it.
I have a problem with it because it's public record.
So just as an example, like equipment operators, for example, if you go on page 5.
Hold on one second. I just want to answer that.
Oh.
We're deciding on positions, not people, aren't we?
We're talking about, right, implementation strategies.
That, yeah. That's
Yeah.
why I don't know.
Right.
Commissioner Hardy?
I mean, it seems to me that we're going back to the conversation that we were having earlier, right? So what we're discussing are these ranges, and in each one of these options, there's a step that involves bringing our employees into these ranges, at least at the very bottom.
Yes.
And then there's a discussion about if we want to take an additional step to put them in certain places within that range. And I guess my question was, that seems to me normally a decision that Mike would make, right? I mean, you know, we kind of create the outline for him to color in. And so this goes back to the question as to what extent do we really, really want to get involved in placing individual people within the ranges that we have mapped their job titles to. Now, I understand that this is an implementation thing, and maybe in addition to just implementing these ranges and making sure that everybody falls at least within them, that we consider erecting a framework for Mike to decide where people go to that goes beyond what we see here. I mean,
I think it's just the dollar
Usually-
amount that we're
yeah.
looking at. We're just looking at the
Sir, may
dollar
I
amount.
answer? Or would you prefer?
No, what I'm saying is that we're not deciding, we're saying, yeah, the match is to bring everybody up to that level, but the choices that we have are whether or not in the budget process, we're going to increase salaries on top of meeting these markers. That's what we decide in the budget process. We just decide the dollar amount.
Right.
So when we decide which way we want to do it, that percentage mark is really going to be defined by how much money we have in the budget and how much money we can or cannot
Right.
give in salary increases, or is just the move to this level first going to be the maximum of our budget ability now? I mean, the choices are going to kind of unveil through the budget process when we see what we have in the budget.
what I hear you saying is that the only reason that we're looking at these three different options is because they imply a budget that we must eventually vote on and decide. But what I'm trying to say is that the budget that we eventually vote on and decide implies a process that Mike has to apply to individual employees as regards where they fall within these ranges. And so I guess in addition to just looking at the budget, do we want to look at the process that is implied in the budget? Because basically we're giving Mike a constrained maximization problem. We say, Mike, we've got these salary ranges. We've given you the salary ranges, right? In addition to that, we're going to give you some extra money. Figure it out. Is that really what we want to just Mike figure it out? Or do we want to work with Mike over our city manager? I shouldn't say Mike. I should say our city manager over the next several months to create a process that we can all agree. And obviously that's what she's doing here, but there are more options than just three options. And I guess
I think right now we're just looking at the options and figuring out which one's going to work best. Because for the budget process, if you remember me saying, you were here for last year's budget.
Yes.
Right? Was it's like a moving, it's like an animal. It's like a living document. And as we change and go and learn our obligations here, there, and everywhere, we make the adjustments that we need to do. And this is very primitive. It's the first meeting. It's the first meeting of this, so it's kind of to get policy decision. The one question I have for you, and this is something that I think maybe you guys might be able to answer for me, and certainly employees of the city would be able. The third option to me sounds difficult to stomach for some employee, like just knowing on some of the arguments that I've heard and people and what's fair and what's right and the things that we hear, in passing or specifically to us, is that would someone say when you're talking about, and that's why I asked you specifically about 5 years here in the city or 5 years doing that job? Am I a 20-year widget maker that I have a history of making widgets for 20 years? Is that in compare? And will people in the city say, hey, this guy might be 20 years a widget maker, but I've been here in the city for X amount of years. Why is 20-year widget maker who never worked for the city and just got here making more money than me, even though I've spent 15 years of my life in the city? Mm-hmm. I think the third option might end up being problematic. I'm not quite sure. What do you think?
Actually, the third option, and again, I think if we do the presentation, we would come back with some recommendations because I obviously have feelings about these and how it would apply out. But the third option actually helps give you some recognition for employees who have been here a while, so that as these folks are moved in it does give you some separation by adding the 0.5% per year for their recognition of being in the city for
I
10
like
years.
the
And-
financial side of
Right.
it, but the labeling side of it, I don't know if employees are gonna have problems with that. I don't know. I'm trying to just protect.
I would have to piggyback on
And
what the
it-
city
Yeah.
manager
And
said.
this is time in the position in the city.
Right.
So it's recognition, and I don't know if you're
She said
understanding it that
no.
way.
Those were two separate questions,
this-
actually. So the original question was about
Right.
hiring people from the outside and how we use the pay ranges. And this one is about implementing the pay ranges that we're proposing that only involves making changes to people that are currently
That are
here.
currently in it. So, and,
okay.
so maybe you misunderstood.
All right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I actually, then maybe we're, but
Yeah,
if
we're
if
gonna-
you asked me today, which one would I be looking at to recommend? But at this point, this is a draft. We're just giving you some options, and we'll come back with recommendations. But
I just want, I just
third
always
one
like to
has
have a
that
level
ability.
playing
Yeah.
field, and I didn't want
Yes,
people
ma'am.
that have been here for a while to feel.
thank you.
Commissioner Hardy?
Yeah. Again, it seems to me that options 2 and 3 go beyond the mere implementation of the salary ranges that this whole thing was about. And so I think if we're going to go beyond the simple application of the salary ranges that we're discussing, I think it should be a very, very robust conversation about how do we decide where people fall within the salary range. And there are many, many possibilities that go beyond option 2 and 3. And so I guess to me, it seems like we should have a 2-step process where we vote on, what this report is about, which is largely the stuff in option 1, and then have another discussion about how to give Mike direction about where to, how he should color in those lines,
I
because
agree.
there are many, many things to consider.
I think getting everybody to where they should be is first and foremost, at least for the budgeting process for right now. Then let's see where we're at, and then we can discuss some more of the interesting and complicated and fabulous minutia that goes into all those decisions.
The details matter.
Okay, but I think at least let's start with getting everybody where they need to be salary wise. Okay.
So just to make it larger on the screen and easier to read, so you've got option number 1, which is basically getting folks to minimum. As you can see there, you have, pull out my glasses, I've got, 39% of the population is below minimum. And in my experience, this makes sense given the amount of time that it's been since your pay plan has been market competitive. And so to me, it makes sense that there would be a significant portion of the population that needs anywhere from a 1.5% increase in pay to a much larger dollar amount in order to get them to the minimum. The good news is that you do have a significant portion of the population inside those pay ranges that are market competitive. So that means something's been going right in terms of, I think as folks have been here for a longer period of time, or you've been in a position to offer them higher rates of pay, that you're getting the pay into those market competitive pay rates. There's always going to be folks who are over the maximum. I mean, it is what it is.
How many?
Right there, it's 11 people. It's actually not that many given the amount of time that it's been since the pay plan's been updated. That's a relatively low number. What is that, a single digit, 3% of the staff?
And so the difference of writing that everyone up to the minimum is 590
Right. Mm-hmm. 590,000.
Spread across the funds
spread across all funds. All funds?
that have employees, yes.
Just checking.
Just checking.
Vice Mayor?
I had a quick question. So
Mhm.
I have the backup that was given to us.
Mhm.
That's a little different than what you're showing here. In my backup, it's a difference of 517,435. Have these numbers been updated since
They-
our backup?
Yes, they have, and thank you for pointing that out. So the information that you received in your packet was the first draft. One of our recommendations was that the pay plan for the IBEW group be more specific and focused on the market rates for the electric, the water, and the sewer. Because there's so many jobs in this pay plan, it made sense to take a similar but different approach to pay structure development for those folks. And then in addition to that, as you can imagine, you've had some terms, you've had some people that we had misclassified in terms of the union assignment, so people moved.
Adjustment. Is
Yeah.
there in the past, we've had like a 10%, 15% error of margin as far as moving things around. Is that kind of what we're looking at as a
probably.
working document?
Yeah, probably closer to the 10% because we've been trying to keep track of changes as they
Yeah,
have
and I
been.
noticed there were a couple people that weren't with us anymore and people that knew people that weren't on there, so
Yeah,
it's a working document.
yeah, exactly. It's a working document. It's a great way to describe it.
Thank you.
So option number 2, just to recap, is that, first let's give a 2% across the board, then move to minimum. What does that cost? Then down there in the black writing, well, what would happen if we did the opposite of that and moved everyone to minimum first and then within the range? Again, trying to give you all some parameters for what the associated costs are and to illustrate what happens to the number of people and how some folks shift from being under minimum. If you were to give them a 2%, it scooches them right within the range, and now they're already above the minimum. So you see a little bit of movement there. And then those folks that are that 2% might actually take them to the maximum. So that number above max or at or above max went from 11 to 13 because 2 people, by giving them that increase, of course, we don't let them go over max. We just take them to the max. And then option number 3, of course, is looking at, what happens if we first implement the new pay plan and then we set aside or allocate some funds to recognize the time that people have been in their jobs here at the city of Lake Worth. And it's again, we used 0.5 percentage point as a point of reference. You have some folks that have been here for a long time, so you can imagine the 0.5 percentage point adds up. So we were trying to be relatively conservative there.
Still $1 million.
Really?
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah. So, and I've written down quite a few notes in terms of our next steps. Is there anything else that you two would like to add?
Mr. Maxwell?
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I've intentionally remained silent through this whole presentation so I could absorb all this, and I just want to share with you a question that I had written down prior to your opening remarks.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, after we've learned all this information here this evening, it's really important for us to say to ourselves, no matter what we decide to do, and no matter what direction we decide to take, how long is this data going to be relevant? Okay, because that is going to determine what we have to do or what we should do with our options to remain competitive going forward.
Mm-hmm.
So if we decide to go with the minimum option, for example, thinking that's going to, take care of the day, and then we realize, oh, shoot, this data is no longer relevant, we're back in the same game. I would just suggest that we understand that that is something we need to look to in the future. And whatever we do, we need to do something that is going to place us in the market so we don't have to chase our tails going forward. And so my question to you is it possible for you to share, or is it possible to say, well, hey, this data maybe is relevant for a year, 2 years, or do we get to have you come back and let's do this all over again and have you contract with us again to come up with more information?
Or is it a capacity that HR can handle now that it's actually been done? I mean, we don't know because it hasn't been done until now, so since I've been here. You know what I'm saying? Is that something that we can do, or do we need to take an outside look at from a different perspective so that it's completely sorry.
It's a combination of both.
Okay.
For a year or 2, we know that the data is pretty valid. But I think every at least 3 years, we should go to an outside, independent
That's what I
person to evaluate our data. That way, there's no concern that that it's gotten skewered. The market's constantly changing, and we know that it's like somebody that's completely independent of the city that's looking from an outside.
And can we, as a governmental body, make an ordinance? That would be something if we had a city attorney here. Can we create an ordinance that makes sure that the city does this so that we're bound by the voter and our terms to make sure that this happens on a regular basis, not like in the past, so that we don't have to worry about not having or keeping or retaining people in the organization to make sure the organization continues to run successfully, doing the right thing by ordinance?
I'm sure you could. I'm not the city attorney. It's usually
Okay.
done by policy, but if you want to make sure that we keep ourselves honest, that's a good way to do it.
I'm more concerned just because it took us so long to get here, and being from the private sector and having to work within the governmental sector,
I've worked in both.
it's a little hard to stomach sometimes. Did you have a follow up to that, or go ahead? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Regarding your comments, Madam Mayor, I think we should be very cautious about trying to codify a policy going forward. I think a resolution
Oh, that's fine.
at most, okay? Because, you know, the economy changes, things change. At the end of the day, and you mentioned voters, well, they expect us to do the right thing. If we don't do the right thing, then we won't be here again to repeat our mistakes of the past.
I worry about one.
So,
future.
you know, I think, you know, I think as far as we want to go with this, is maybe a resolution or a real strong commitment to this going forward. I think we've demonstrated over the last 6 or 7 years our commitment to trying to move forward and get everybody up to where they should be. So, you know, our values regarding this issue have not changed. I think if anything, they've been strengthened and enhanced now that we have this study to consider. So I just caution us that we don't get too far ahead of ourselves and make promises that maybe we won't be able to, completely honor in the future based on external conditions.
Well, I'm fine with that. I just want to just keep us all honest and make sure that whether the market's up or down, that we're looking at what the real numbers are out there and we're comparing them to real, you have to remember when I got here, they were still doing things in ledgers. We've grown a little bit since then. So I'd like to make sure that we actually have systems in place to make sure that these things keep happening. But I have all the confidence in the world in you and the department and staff. I didn't mean that in any way, shape, or form. I just want to make sure that this has been such an integral part of the budgeting process that we've had to operate and create those decisions without it. That, yeah, it's great that we finally have it now, and I'm excited for everybody. But it's just, I just want to make sure that doesn't happen to people 20 years from now. Commissioner Hardy.
I think you guys are talking about the same thing and different things at the same time. I think Commissioner Maxwell is afraid of resolving that we'll pay within whatever band a consultant like this lady will tell us is accurate at that time. I think you're saying that we should at least have the information.
Yeah.
So I think we can certainly resolve to bring somebody back every X number of years to make sure that we have accurate information. We don't necessarily have to resolve to implement whatever information we get. And so I would be in favor of resolving to bring somebody back to make sure that we have accurate compensation information.
Thank you for doing that, because that's exactly correct. You read us correctly. Thank you. Commissioner Robinson, how are you reading this?
I'm very proud to be in Lake Worth and congratulate city manager and the mayor and the commissioners that brought us to this point. It was a long time. Persistence does pay off, and so I want to be competitive in the workforce, but a lot of times it's not about the money. It's about working for people that you want to work with, and we have management and staff that I feel really happy to be in our city working with us, and that's money is important, but a lot of times it's who you're working with and what you're working for that makes a difference. And
Group hug.
And I Lake Worth is a great place. So thank you, Mayor, for bringing us along to have a study like this. It's going to help.
I couldn't have done it without my fellow commissioners at the time, so thank you all very much. All right, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to item 3B, first budget work session presented by Stantec.
Madam Mayor, while the team is coming up, as you'll recall, we've been working with Stantec now for several years. Actually, it goes back many years that they were originally working with the water utilities as Burton and Associates. And the team that's with us tonight has been with us through several budget cycles.
Are you all set up electronically? Or do you need a minute? Ready to go?
They're up and going. And you'll recall Eric Van Malsen, who is going to be on the keyboards tonight.
Who's on drums?
Letitia, and I'll never get her last name right. Gaglianoni.
You remember, it's the band formerly
Yeah,
known as.
it's Irish. Letitia is going to be
See,
taking
we've
the
forgotten
leads,
the former name right now.
and Deborah Klokner. Klokner, did I say that right? I'm bad. I'm good with the first names. Will be doing the presentations. Remember that this is an active spreadsheet process that allows you to get a snapshot picture, an overview of the funds that we're talking about. And tonight we'll be doing water, electric, and the beach fund. And it also gives you an opportunity to manipulate data in real time. So it's not a printout that we can hand out because it is an active living spreadsheet. However, when we do get some direction here, or if you feel like you've reached sort of a place where you want us to proceed to the next level of budgeting discussions, we'll be able to get that data. But I didn't want anybody to think that we were doing this handout on an active spreadsheet. So it's something we've been doing for several years, and it'll be very familiar. We also have our water utility director, Brian Shields, here, and some of his staff as well. So with that, who am I turning it over to first? Letitia?
Hear the echo.
Thank you. Thank you for waiting through you learned a lot about competent classification, I'm sure.
We did. That was a pretty interesting presentation and informative. Since we were talking about it, we haven't, as far as I know, none of that information is currently included in our projections. So just a FYI.
Oh, thanks a
We
lot.
don't have the actual numbers yet from what she was saying. I think they're still kind of figuring out all the steps and which options y'all might try to go with or whatever. So we don't have any of the stuff in what we're presenting today.
So that's 900.
So today we wanted to kind of give you a little brief introduction of our team again and our company, and then go through our scope for this project. And then we'll go into the electric fund. I have prepared 4 to 5 slides for each one of the funds. And the plan is to basically go through the slides and then go into an interactive or a live modeling session where you guys can ask questions, you can play out scenarios, and we can try to figure out some possible outcomes and what outcomes that are most comfortable for everybody.
You've been here before.
Yes. So our project team is Mike Burton. Mike Burton couldn't be here with us, but he's the project director. Eric Van Malsen's our project manager. I am a senior consultant with Stantec, and then we've got Deb right there sitting on the bench. And Alex was here last week as part of our
Did we scare him?
interaction with staff,
didn't
but
come
he couldn't
back?
make it today.
Oh, okay.
So we're missing him.
We scare off at least one each year, don't we?
Yeah, he works with
And
us.
you're
He's
still-
scared all the time.
I keep coming back.
Without a beard this time.
I know, it keeps getting
Yeah,
better
where's
though,
his
doesn't it?
It had a time limit on it. I reached a personal goal, and it was growing until that goal was achieved.
We need to talk to you about your goal. That's the man with the beard.
Twitter.
So as Mike Bernstein had pointed out, we have actually been working with the city on the utility side since 2008. We've been doing the water and sewer and regional funds since then. And starting in fiscal year 2015, we came in to do the integrated financial analysis, which is the one that we have been doing with you all now. It takes into account all of the enterprise funds, the water, sewer, regional, sanitation, stormwater, electric, general fund, and beach. Thanks.
He remembers.
Our project scope this year is the same as it was last year, is to essentially update our financial management plan. And as part of that, we use a couple of guiding or purposes, I guess, if you will. So we update our customer demand and property data as part of the process. We'll update the operating needs based on the new budget and forecast that staff gives us every year. We also look at capital and R&R needs, which are also given to us by staff. We will ensure or try to project out a financial plan that ensures compliance with the existing and any new issued debt, and maintain within or stay within a reserve target policy for your operating fund. We also look at evaluating and making sure that the planning period, the 10-year projection that we typically look at, is sustainable. And last but not least, we compare our utility rates with surrounding areas, the rates of utilities in the surrounding area. So without further ado, we'd like to start with the electric fund. So I kind of wanted to place us as we are today. And so with the, go ahead. On the revenue side, projections or actual fiscal year 17 rate revenues came in about $1.5 million short of projections last year. The reason for that, I guess, the lower revenues was the growth did not come in as we were projecting in the prior year. So residential units grew only about 191 meters versus a projected of 693. Commercial units were 17 versus a projected units of about 59. And billed kilowatts per hour were declined from fiscal year 16 to fiscal year 17. And at that point, projections were for an increase of 2.5. Back when we were doing this projection, the fiscal year 17 projections, we were at the tail end of a large increase in revenues from fiscal year 16 over fiscal year 15. And as part of that discussion, as part of the reviewing that growth, we had discussions with staff about that possible growth continuing. And as part of the discussion, I think staff was a little bit more comfortable with, they had a better idea of this growth coming in. And so I think we expect some of this growth to still possibly come in the future. But because it hasn't really taken place in fiscal year 17, now what we've done with fiscal year 18 rate revenues is we've substantially adjusted our projection for growth down. And so for fiscal year, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get her attention so she can get your attention. Thank you. Just on the revenue side, how much of an impact did the hurricane have? We were out of power for, what, a week?
So that was part of the discussion. I don't know that we can characterize the actual dollar amount, but that was part of our discussion with staff, is that one of the issues that could have happened as that the usage went down has to do with the hurricane. I think the other portion may have been with just a less severe winter. And a third topic that we discussed as part of our staff internal discussion with staff was that there was a major equipment break in the plant, and service availability went down below 91% or 90%, I believe. And so that may have impacted that usage decline as well.
Thank you.
Ed, do you want to explain that, please?
Introduce yourself. I'm the Lifeline. Introduce yourself. She's the Lifeline. Ed Liberty, Director of Electric Utility, for the audience. Good question on the revenue projection, on the revenue drops because of the hurricane. So if we just divide the year into 52 weeks, during one of those weeks, we were out probably for, and it was been 2 days to 6.5 days, depending on the customer. So on average, 3 days. So I think if we just say, well, each week is a small percentage of the total year, it has an impact, but I don't think it's a significant impact in terms of the overall hit to the budget. But it certainly is a revenue loss. However, it's also not one for one, because if we didn't sell electric, we also didn't buy electric during that week. Our fixed costs remain the same, but we didn't have to buy product.
Right.
We didn't have to sell it. We'd still rather buy it than sell it.
Yeah. Have you guys, I guess, created a sort of a pie chart among these three contributing factors to rate revenue coming in lower than projected to see, to what extent is the miss attributable to the miss in residential units or the miss in commercial units versus the miss in total billed kilowatts? Have you guys done that kind of analysis, or is it even possible? Or
We, in the electric utility, we implemented about 4 months ago, 6 months ago. Now Clyde is here because he's been doing a lot of the work for me. We look at budgets versus actuals every single month for every customer class, every revenue line item, and every expense line item. So we have a good feel on month to month where this is happening in which markets, and we're also trying to tie that to some economic factors, whether it's weather related or economy or things like that.
I guess my question is for the 4.43% miss, that represents an actual number of rate revenue that we did not take in. If you were to take that actual number and see how much of that number is actually we know the three factors, but we don't know how much of that actual number is attributable to residential units increase versus commercial units, not coming in, and versus total billed kilowatt hours not coming in where we expected them. Did you I guess figure out to what extent the miss is attributable to each factor?
No, we have not, but I'm trying to think back to the actual model, and I know that the bulk of the revenues comes in from the consumption line. And I can't tell you the separation between residential and commercial at this point. I guess maybe when we get to the model, the live modeling, we might be able to give you just an idea of what portion of the revenue comes from each, from the commercial or in the residential unit, and what portion maybe comes from base fee and usage.
We could say anecdotally that a large portion of that revenue miss came from the total decreased usage overall.
Okay.
The usage decreased from the prior year, and no rate revenue was increased. Same rates, but less usage overall. And our trend going forward into mid-year fiscal year 18 is month by month continued decline in usage, unfortunately.
But if you're bringing more units in and more units are going online, then how is it coming up?
That's a great question. We also notice a decrease in usage per account despite new usage. And you also need to really pay attention to that top line. We're anticipating almost 3.25% increase in residential account growth. Less than 1% was actually achieved. So the actual growth within the city is not materializing versus what was projected in that year.
Explanation. When we have the numbers of what's being built and what's being put online, then why are we not?
Well, remember, FY17 was written the preceding year. And so when we guess or give our best estimates on who's going to build units and actually have them CO'd and occupied with the meter running, it is just that. It's a guess. It's our best guess. And we work with community sustainability in the building department, and we try to look at those projects that would be coming online. And for whatever reasons, either the projects came online before or after this period. So I don't know if you have any other.
Ed?
A couple of points. With respect to the projected growth, recognizing just last week that these forecasts were not as good as we'd like them to be, we implemented a program that I directed staff to start creating basically a sales forecasting tool where we can take a look at everything that's happening within the sustainability group and revenue growth, for example, Jones Group, Williams Group, and then also in the village and the unincorporated county areas, to take a look at what specific things are happening, what stages of development they're at, what kinds of development they are, and when we expect them to come online, and then to update that periodically as they go through various gates of development and continue to forecast when we're going to have them online. So it'll be less of a guessing exercise and much more based on facts and information that's out there, but we just have to do a lot of the work to go bring it into one common database so we can forecast better.
It doesn't have anything to do with rate parity.
No, not in that year. However, one of the things we do point out is when we made the switch to AMI and began to roll out basically 26,000 plus new meters, invariably we put meters out there that were more accurate than the meters that were there previously, and in some cases may have gotten meters working that were not working before. So you would have seen a step function, if you would, step increase in revenues. But you can't assume that then continues on that slope. That was a one-time increase, and then you'll have organic growth or organic reduction, as some people leave. The other thing we are seeing, though, is the average use, for example, in residential, over time will decrease on a per residence basis as the incandescent bulbs finally blow out and they replace it with either a compact fluorescent or an LED. They buy the more efficient refrigerator. Of course, if they choose to put the old refrigerator in the garage and fill it with beer, that helps too. But it's, over time, you'll see the home just become more efficient because you just can't keep buying inefficient appliances. So you'll see some attrition there in terms of load growth.
Well, and that's what I was going to say too. With the new growth comes new appliances and upgraded. They're not using as much. Would the PACE program and the amount of people that are using solar play into this at all? Have we looked at that?
It does play into it. This is something that we want to come back and talk to you about some more. Not just PACE, which is certainly going to be moving more solar into the marketplace than we had anticipated or perhaps thought would happen, but net metering and the way that we currently apply net metering will grow to be a significant issue. It's already a revenue hit. Actually, you can probably say that we're losing the equivalent of, in some cases, of what we're gaining because we're paying money out for net metering or forgiving certain expenses. So that's a whole other discussion we have to have. We're beginning to quantify that. The number of customers net metering now is in excess of 50. It's probably closer to 55. Some of them are rather substantial. We'll be looking at credits of $1,000 to $3,000 in some cases.
Well, and I think that's
A month?
It could be in some, yes.
yeah, and
That's how large they've gotten.
that's why I mentioned it, because Ed and I had that conversation, and I think we need to have that conversation within this budget period because we need to get ahead of it. And, as we move people into a better way of living and watching electric and using solar, we have to look at how we're going to pay the bills on the other side.
Right.
So, we need to get ahead of that.
It's basically allowing those customers to skirt paying portion of the fixed cost of the system, which then layers that across all the other customers. So therefore, philosophically, what winds up happening is that the entity that can afford to install solar or is willing to go into debt to install solar is being subsidized in part by the entities that did not. And it's very simple economics. If you deliver energy at 10 cents and of that 7 cents was the cost of product, and you credit somebody 10, but you only got 7 cents worth of value, you're losing 3 cents on that transaction that should have gone into the pot to recover the fixed cost. So we're quantifying all of that right now. We'll bring that back. I can't say that that's a significant number here. It's in the decimal points, but it's going to become more of an issue down the road if we don't close that loophole going forward.
Commissioner Robinson?
I just, the importance of, or the difference between commercial and residential, we need to know in terms of growth and where we're going to emphasize our sales pitch, because one may be better than the other in terms of selling electric. That's all.
Commissioner Hardy?
I'm gonna state my question in another way. Have you done something that says, okay, we'll take as a given that commercial units only increased at 0.75%, and we'll take as a given that total billed kilowatt hours decreased at 2 1/3%. If residential units had increased according to our projections, the miss would have been some other number than 4.5% off. Is that something that you guys have looked at?
Yeah, what we're trying to say is, had you had grown almost 700 residential accounts or 60 commercial accounts and the total usage increased rather than decreased, you'd be on the mark. But we're missing the mark because some factors are not allowing for growth to occur, and for whatever reason, consumption is declining. And so the point we're trying to drive home to, and keep in mind, this is the first slide of a few, and there's a lot of news to talk about.
We're not going to get through the night.
Fiscal year 18 rate revenues, we've reduced our expectations for growth because of this now reality. Going forward, we've reduced our expectation of growth rather than 2.5% down to 1% for conservative sakes, 0.75 for commercial, and 0.5% increase for usage rather than increasing at 2%, recognizing efficiencies in equipment being installed in new houses, reduction in use of individual accounts. We're now building this into our projection as a conservative estimate going forward because the growth hasn't been achieved. And unless otherwise we hear a really good reason why it's going to happen next year, we don't want to tell you it's going to happen like it was before. this is just revenues. We do need to talk about expenses. So
Sure.
you need to understand this full picture before the questions really start coming out. If I have to be so front.
Sure.
So.
Please.
All right, then let's get to expenses. So
We're used to his tough love.
So in fiscal year 17, we had O&M expenses for this one fund, the electric fund, that came in higher at about $720,000, and this was in the nuclear power expense, or part of it came, a good chunk of it came from the nuclear power expense. On the personnel side, there was some lower costs, and so therefore a little bit of a benefit, if you will, of $450,000 just due to regular salaries and part-time costs. Going into our 2018 budget and the forecast that the city has given us since last week, we've got higher O&M expenses of about $5.8 million. Granted, about $3.2 million of that is a one-time charge. 2.4 is a one-time charge to OUC, and about $800,000 is due to some plant equipment repair at the electrical plant. And then purchase water is estimated to increase by about 1.6 million, and other budget items like contractual services and legal and a couple other costs are going up, and for a total of $1 million. So you've got, in comparison to what we were looking at last year, we've got an 18 projected expense or budget that will be about 5.8 million larger than what we were looking at yesterday. And on the personnel side, we have some minor reductions in life and health insurance costs and benefits for this one particular fund. So the key challenges of this fund is maintaining its operating reserve target of 3 months. As we start out the fiscal year, we're at about 2.9 months, so we're just below that 3 month mark. As we project out fiscal year 18 ending balance, we're saying that this fund's going to be at about 14 days of O&M reserve. And by fiscal year 19, the fund would end up with no reserves whatsoever. So maintaining sufficient debt service coverage is the other issue. Specifically in fiscal year 18, we're calculating a debt service coverage of 0.35%. Once again, mind you, that 3.2 million of that 5.8 million is a one-time charge, and that's a top of the line charge. So if you hit the your revenues with that top charge of 3.2 million, your actual coverage, projected coverage, is at that 3.5 times, no, 0.35 times your annual debt service. If you back out the 3.2 million, that's a one-time charge, then that coverage goes back up to about 1.3 times. So your coverage, let me back up for a minute. So your coverage is your net revenues available for debt service divided by your debt service expense. So what that's doing is when you get your net revenue available for debt service, you've got your revenues minus all your O&M costs, which includes the 2 one-time charges that I mentioned in the prior slide.
What was the one-time 3.2, Ed?
That's the addition of the 2.4 to OUC, and then the 800,000 to the purchase power, I'm sorry, to the electrical plant equipment.
So what is,
GT2
what
went
is
down. Remember the
Generator.
turbine blew apart?
OUC for what?
Under our current power purchase agreement with Orlando Utilities Commission, OUC, there was a clause that was triggered in the last year of the contract. It just happened to fall in the last year. If GT2, or gas turbine 2 combined cycle unit, went below 90% availability, it triggered a supplemental capacity charge for the following calendar year. So in the 2017 calendar year, because they work on a calendar year, that unit went below 90% availability when the compressor failed in the November-December timeframe. October, November, I guess it was November-December timeframe. When it went below 90%, it triggered that clause in the contract, which had been agreed to back in the 2013 timeframe. And then it kicked that penalty in, if you will, for calendar year 2018, which is most of our fiscal year 18, a little bit in 3 months into 19. In addition to that, the repairs cost actually $1.2 million in change, not 800, but 1.2. Some of that may be able to be capitalized. So you had the repairs to the unit and then the supplemental capacity charges.
How long is our contract with OUC?
It was actually a 3-year contract with 2 one-year extensions. It expires at the end of this year, and we're currently in the market for a new power purchase contract.
But we had to come to the table with an additional 2.3 million.
The total cost of that failure, if you count the repairs and the supplemental capacity charges, which we've called the penalty, is roughly $4 million in change, that incident.
Yeah, there's a 2.4 in the budget right now in 18, and then there's a 815 in 19. So it kind of got split out because of the calendar year issue. Because of the calendar year.
Should we be buying insurance for unexpected situations like that?
It would be difficult to buy insurance at a reasonable rate given the age and the condition of this equipment. Part of the problem is that the equipment.
But it's still aging and, you know, should we be looking into insurance on our age? Because we're not going to replace it.
I'd have to talk to the risk management folks in terms of, what that insurance might cost to insure these assets, but.
Well, it cost us $4 million.
A one-time event, yeah, it did cost us $4 million in supplemental capacity charges.
If I could too, go ahead.
I'm McShane Murphy, Assistant Director of HR/Risk Manager for the city. We are currently in the process of restructuring our entire insurance when it comes to all of our assets that we have within the city. So that'll be something that'll come within the next year, that we'll be reassessing all of our properties that are owned. So that is in the works right now. I can't speak on the numbers, but we are in the works of doing that.
I mean, we can even buy insurance for penalties.
We can look into that. I'll make a note to have our insurance consultant look into the penalties of that. It'll really come down to the cost and the cost effectiveness of, is it worth paying into a plant that's older than.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hardy?
I would say, first of all, that would be an extraordinarily difficult thing to price. And if it's difficult to price, that means it's probably going to be expensive. The other thing I would say is, and it gets to the nature of what is one time versus recurring. If this is, as you said, a very old plant, and these things might break down not once, but there might be multiple things breaking down. And if we have contracts that require us to put money up when things break down because capacity isn't available, then this might not be a one-time charge. This might be a recurring charge. I'm thinking about a company that's going through a restructuring, and every year they might report a one-time charge. But the fact is, because you've got a crappy business, you continue to have these non-recurring things recurring continually. It's the same thing here. We've got a very old plant. This might recur. So I don't know if I'm quite willing to accept that this is a one-time thing. If we've got an old plant that's going to continue to be old, that
Was that written
things
to
are
everybody?
going to continue
is
to
that
break.
written into everybody's contract?
Well, I'm not privy to everybody's contract, because there were only a couple of utilities that had this, and I haven't read their contract. It certainly is in our contract, and we've read it, including our consultants have read it back and forth, and we don't see a way to get out of it. It's clearly, it's in there.
How far below 90 or whatever were we?
Substantially below, because we missed the last 2 months of the year, so that would have been at least 2 out of 12 months would have taken us well below 90%. I'm going to say it's into the 70s. I think we went.
And to piggyback on that, as we go into new contracts, I would hope that nothing like this is in any of the new contracts, and OUC should take that into consideration if they're in the bidding, because we can't afford this. And like Commissioner Hardy said, this will be an ongoing issue because of the age of our equipment. So I would hope that nothing even close to this would be in any of the new contracts.
It's a big hit.
Agreed. We're on the lookout for that, for that issue. I can also say that this plant is there largely in part because we don't have a second tie line. So once we have a second tie line, we'll be in a position to have a different discussion about the economics of the contracts that we enter into and what the fate of that plant is. Part of the reason it's there is because if that one tie line goes down, that plant supports the city. So it has capacity value in the marketplace for us, but it also provides that reliability in case the tie line goes down.
Commissioner Hardy, did you have another question?
I did not.
Okay. To the issue of one-time events, we do have other units on that power plant that are in similar condition and even older. So we're worried and concerned about how they continue to operate going forward. So the continued reliability and availability of those units is a question mark.
Did this information go before the Electric Utility Advisory Board?
Yes, they're aware of
very
this.
aware.
They haven't been through this budget presentation, but
They're aware of the $5 million.
they've seen budget presentations and financials. I think Commissioner Robinson may have been in the room when we discussed it.
Right, let's continue on.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Hardy.
I guess my question is, when we talk about laying out reserves for things, have we considered creating a reserve for monies that we may, like a loss reserve, in the future, like, you're going to take a loss?
Yeah, well, I guess what I would have to add to that is in an effort to have a reserve, you have to either cut back on expenses or increase rates.
Right.
So in order to actually build something like that, which is something that we can do, and it's something that as a utility, typically utilities consider and have, you would have to go, either way with a reduction in cost or an increase in revenue.
That top challenge, maintaining 3 months of operating and maintenance reserve, that reserve is there for a number of issues. One is just liquidity sakes. Two is to handle situations like this.
Okay.
And when we came in here last year and we projected going forward, we were right at the bottom of that reserve target and projected it going forward had growth materialized or these additional expenses had not occurred. But when you're right at the top of those trees, you're like flying a plane right on the top of the forest. If you go down an inch, you're hitting those trees. So we're now in a situation where revenues are not being achieved as projected. Costs got overrun. Now you have to use those reserves for this situation. The problem is those reserves are now depleted.
Right.
And if something else happened next year without a structural shift in cost of revenues, as we've got to keep talking about here in a minute, it's going to be difficult to cover those. We would typically recommend 6 months of reserves for a utility that faces situations like this, but that's going to be a significant challenge to achieve over the next 10 years.
So, I asked questions last year about reserves for this utility versus reserves for other utilities, and my question, will be now. Obviously, it has to come from one of two places. If we're going to replenish our reserves or even establish more robust reserves, how sticky is the cost side?
We're going to get there.
The spreadsheet tells all.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
spreadsheet.
that's the plan. So I just have a couple of other remarks. So the last remark is that in order to fund any kind of capital or any kind of upgrades to your system, you would have to have the capital, and either that or you'd have to issue debt. But you can only find available funds or debt if you have a target, if you have an operating reserve, and if you meet your coverage. And so from here on out, the funding of any needed infrastructure repair becomes really hard. And so again, just to kind of bring it home, the key challenges is, we've got lower revenues, higher expenses. We're projecting fiscal year end balances below the 3 months target, and then we need an action. And essentially, you either need to reduce expenses or increase revenues or a combination of the two.
And just to be specific, recurring expenses. You could delay a project, but that's not going to help you year over year. And let's jump right into the model.
Yeah. Losing your touch, man.
They don't let me operate the keyboard as much these days.
So what you're looking at now is our panel, and I know some of you all, I think all of you all looked at this last year. So the green bars and green references generally are what was there last year. They were our projection for fund balances last year that Eric is currently showing you. And then we've got some capital on the bottom and green bars, and then no borrowing for long-term borrowing. Now with our new current scenario, we have, again, 0% rate increases on the board. And so what that does is, as you can see in the operating reserve fund, fiscal year 17 balance is already below that 3 months target, the black line. And then we're projecting that by fiscal year 18, that operating reserve is down to, I think he's pointing at 2.1 million.
Approximately 17 days of reserve.
And if you look at the revenue and expense chart, that's the all telling. So we have that big gap between the blue line is your revenues. The green line is your cash out. And so you see the big gap in fiscal year 18 due to the huge hit in expenses, and then that going into fiscal year 19, some of those one-time items are projected off the books because we can't see forward and we don't know if there's going to be another type of failure. So we just have those things falling out, and so you see that big sharp reduction in the green line from fiscal year 18 to 19, and then you just have a normal rising or upsloping curve, which is just your O&M costs going up. We do have some capital projects in here, and anything beyond the projects that I guess all of the projects in here going forward are debt funded because this fund can't support any kind of cash funding for projects.
It should be noted that a hunk of these projects are being paid by your existing
Bank of America
loan proceeds, but
Yep.
not all of them are eligible for that.
Exactly.
So it was asked, what is this going to take to turn this thing around? It's not all good news, but I want to show you what the answer is. If you looked at a pure cost side of point of view, what costs need to be lobbed off this budget to make this sustainable? I'm just going to work you up to it. Could you achieve a $3 million annual savings in this fund? And watch these blue bars change. $3 million annual savings in this fund bought you fund balance for a few years, still well below your target. The answer is if you were to purely adjust this on a cost basis, you need to reduce your overall recurring expenses by $6 million per year to not only build up just a 3-month balance, but to maintain that over the 10-year projection period. And that's without assuming any significant capital projects in these out years. Of course, you have the option as the governing body to raise rates, but I'm not going to go there knowing the sensitivity of that in this community until you ask me to show that. But that's the answer on the cost side. $6 million of recurring costs. I cannot say if that's possible or not. Your utility director would have to find.
The other option we talked about was it was always sort of the overall business plan to stop the size of the transfers over from the utilities into the general fund because of the failures of the general fund to prop it up. If you'll notice up there, there's 8% across the board. Did you run some scenarios where you actually reduced it down? And that would make Ed very happy because the issues you're talking about investing back into, you know, we've always looked at those transfers as the dividend if it was an investor owned. And that's money that would be paid out. And part of that would always be kept to reinvest back into the infrastructure and the capital needs of the business. He doesn't get to do that. So that's another option that was always talked about but hasn't been affected.
So let me talk about that. We just put a blanket $6 million reduction. Your transfer from the electric fund to the general fund is just north of $4 million, 4.2, 4.3 at that 8%. You could lob that off and achieve $4.3 million of savings. Your general fund is going to really hurt.
Yeah.
And next time we're sitting in this room with all the other funds, we're going to be able to tell you exactly what that means to your general fund if that were to be decided.
Commissioner Hurd.
If I could add to that, not only would the general fund really hurt, but it still wouldn't get us where we need to go.
Not all of it.
Yeah, or at least not within that time
And
frame.
let's just show if
Yeah.
I pulled that $6 million out and just simply took away that transfer starting next fiscal year going forward.
You still don't get there.
You maintain some, you don't go broke. You don't get yourself a 3-month reserve balance, and going forward, costs will escalate faster than your revenues. But it is an option. I can't say yet what that means to your general fund until we prepare that analysis.
So, are you saying we're moving 8% over right now? What's the physical number that we're moving over?
8% of your rate revenues or total revenues for each one of your utility funds. All of your funds do this right now too.
I'll move 8% over
Yep.
It's approximately $4.5 million from this fund
from
itself.
the elect.
And that's for the payment in lieu of taxes or franchise fees or the dividend payment. You still move administrative allocation charges too. That's a transfer on top of this.
Yep.
But this is the pure cut of the revenues.
Okay. So it's 4 million, and what does it total from electric with everything else?
That is electric.
That's the electric, that's the contribution to the general fund. But if you also look at the administrative charges,
Yeah.
6.5, 7.
What's your hard cost though?
city admin charges.
Well, your cost to operate IT finance functions, administrative functions, your salaries, and costs as a budget. It's all.
Are those titled something different now, Leticia?
It's amazing how they remember.
Well, and the reason I'm asking is 6 years ago, 6.5 years ago when we came, we asked everyone to tighten their budget. We haven't really done that and looked at the hard costs, the IT hard costs, the other, in 6.5 years.
It's another $1.8 million to answer your question.
Okay,
On
so
top
we're
of
still
that,
only
4.5.
we still haven't got to the 6. But are we looking, Mr. City Manager, are we looking at, some of these hard costs again after, 6.5 years, the IT costs,
Well,
trying to.
Your statement implies that we didn't look at it. We have, and we've actually studied how to distribute those costs. The problem we have in this city is, if you want to use IT, there's a whole nother set of issues that we're going to have to grapple with our legacy program and equipment and outdated equipment and things. There's still a lot of needs and dysfunction that we're working through. So when we get over to the general fund and those costs, we're going to have some serious discussions. But this is the first blush of what's being pushed into the budget numbers by the electric utility. And this gives you a scale of the complication of trying to make these numbers work.
And I got to reiterate, we've plugged in the first brush of fiscal year 19, but we show by the end of this current fiscal year, this little blue dot right here. So going forward, the challenge is going to be immense for this fund.
I'm sorry, the challenge is going to what?
Be immense.
Large.
That was technical.
Commissioner Hardy?
So the options that we have,
What does staff propose us to do? Should we just take this bad news and go, oh my God, let's go crawl under a rock? What do you expect us to, what would you
Well,
like to see
here's-
us at this point?
Here,
I want to answer.
we want to show you what we're grappling with, and as we obviously go back as the team
This
to
is the
try
first
to,
time I'm being made aware of this, so. I'm
and that's
upset
what this
right now.
budget presentation was intended to show you, these funds. This is our starting point. Obviously, we have to balance the budget. So as we go back and look at the numbers and hone operations and look at all the different, because that's what we do. We're good at budgeting. We'll bring back options.
Commissioner Hardy?
you gave us three
I
options.
don't know what are you going to say.
Right, based on the assumptions that are built into your model, which have assumptions about residential unit growth and use and commercial unit growth, right, and use. Okay, and those three options are cut costs by $6 million a year, and we have not heard whether or not that's actually feasible, which we expect to hear hopefully shortly. The other thing is to reduce the franchise fee from 8% to 0%, but that still doesn't get us where we need to be as far as our reserves at any point in the next 10 years, based on what we saw. And then the other things which you did not mention was the possibility of raising rates, which is politically unpalatable, but financially it has its import. The other thing is, I guess, so, you built in a 1% residential unit increase, or
Residential growth. So
residential growth?
yeah. So if we look forward at the new accounts added to the system each year,
Right.
you achieved 191 of those accounts last fiscal year. We're projecting about 159 this year. Going forward, that 1% growth represents just a bit north of 200 new utility accounts every year. Now, just to kind of go follow your thought process, what if we tripled that?
Well, and my question is, these new residential units are coming from things being constructed or existing structures being divided, such that maybe a parcel that had one meter on it maybe goes to two because it's converted into a duplex or what have you. And this is a community sustainability issue. We're having, and I just, this, you know, everything's connected to the thing, you know, to the decisions that we're making. We're having a discussion about our zoning code, and we're having a discussion about density, and we're having a discussion about a number of things. This chart is telling us what we should do in other discussions that we're having. So when we have that LDR discussion, I just want this chart to be firmly in our mind that 20 units a year is not going to cut it. Residential unit growth, when we have our discussions about height limit, density, things like that. So go ahead.
Commissioner Maxwell?
Thank you. And I'm sure this is not necessarily a question that our consultants can answer, but I'll throw it out to staff if anybody has the answer to this. At a 1% projected growth for the city of Lake Worth in terms of the units or whatever, what's the county's growth?
Your point is that that's a very conservative number. I in our initial push of these numbers, I would argue that if we're hitting 1%, we've got bigger issues in the sustainability of the city, much less this operation. I think that those numbers are incredibly conservative, but that's what we went with based on what, when these numbers were fed in, that the staff was comfortable and the consultants were comfortable with.
I wanted to calibrate your understanding of, though, what this growth will do to this fund.
Please.
If we put back in a higher level of growth, say we achieve 3% residential growth every year, just shy of 600 accounts, the model will assume that level of growth. Taking a long time to think about what it can do for that.
And it's not just the commercial, it's the residential and the industrial.
Well, you know, does anybody have the answer to me? What is the county's percentage of growth?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's something we need to look into because we could sit here all day in a vacuum and talk about how wonderful our city is and how we're growing and things are getting better.
Mm-hmm.
But if everybody else is getting better and growing as well at a much higher pace, then to your point, City Manager, we have bigger issues to discuss and to grapple with.
So I tripled the growth, and the curve of this blue line shot up dramatically. It's now matching the slope of your cost curve, but the gap between the two has not been closed, so the overall projection of deficits using your fund balance does not get corrected, even with that higher level of growth. So it's just the overall revenues and overall costs being so far apart that it will take 20 years for those curves to cross at this level of growth and expense growth rate.
Commissioner Robinson?
I'm concerned about the hardening, your budget for hardening, where that's coming from. And the expectation of, 600 units a year? I'm not sure that we want to emphasize 600 units versus commercial growth.
Commissioner Hardy?
You know, what I'll say is on that growth question, county versus the city, if you look at our comprehensive plan in the data and analysis section of the comprehensive plan, we are slated to grow at a rate that is significantly slower than the county. I think the county is slated to grow in like the mid 6% a year. We're slated to grow, I believe, in the low 4s per year. So lower growth is baked into our comprehensive planning. That's something that we all acknowledged by voting to approve that comprehensive plan. So we've accepted here just recently that we're just going to grow at a rate that's slower than the county, and that somehow that's going to be sustainable for us. Now, my question is, we looked at residential growth. Can we look at commercial growth as well?
It's just to calibrate your understanding, though, 20 out of your total rate revenue, approximately for fiscal year, let's look at actual 18, approximately $37 million. 23 of it comes from residential, and 9.2 or 9.3 million comes from commercial. So,
but each commercial meter has a higher value.
Correct.
Because we're charging them a higher rate.
So let's just look at a really optimistic scenario here.
Okay.
3% residential growth, 2.5% commercial growth every year. I'm going to calculate the model. Watch this blue line shoot up, but it doesn't close the gap soon enough to preserve your fund
What's the
balance.
distance on the gap?
Right now, for fiscal year 19, if that growth were to materialize, we're showing you a projected expense of 58 million and revenues of 56.2. So you're looking at about $2 million gap. And with about $2 million in reserves, it uses that in 1 year.
What would be a recommendation to close that gap?
I can offer that for you. Let me go back to a more conservative effort, and let's bump it up just a tiny bit to maybe achieve higher level of growth than we had come in here initially. You have two options: raise revenues or reduce expenses, or a combination of both. I showed you the bad case scenario on expenses. Find $6 million to lob off this budget recurring. Let's find somewhere in the middle. If you reduced overall expenses by $3 million a year, maybe a portion of that can come from the general fund percentage, maybe a portion of it can come from somewhere else. The revenue answer is not that bad. When we look at solving for your utility funds, we have every year looked at revenue increases to solve for the sustainability of these funds, with the exception of this fund. And I know why. But it's time you need to understand the numbers that can make this work. If I came in and produced 2 years of 5% rate increases with that $3 million reduction, it's become sustainable. And it comes to the point where if that growth's achieved, you can reduce rates in the future years. But that 5% rate adjustment, which would go from a bill of $107.97 now to $113.37 per month for your average residential electric user, we're up to $119 over 3 years. And $3 million of expense reductions would solve for the sustainability of this fund and build you up your 3-month reserve balance within 5 years and work towards an even higher level of reserve balances if you chose to do that, or you could reduce rates in this.
Where are you going to find the $3 million?
Hello?
Next.
I don't have a rabbit in a hat.
Do you have
although
$3 million?
We can take a significant lump out of that $3 million in the current negotiation that we're going to go into on the electric supply. So we're out on the street right now. We've issued the offering memorandum to the 6 participants, and we're waiting for their replies. So we'll have them registered by the end of the month, and then June, July, August, we'll be into the meat of the discussions with them.
I haven't seen your crystal ball, but what makes you think that we could take a $3 million chunk out of going into new negotiations?
I'm not prepared to commit to a $3 million chunk. I'm prepared to say it's going to be a good chunk of that $3 million, a portion of it. And the reason for that is that there's indicators in the market that show that the numbers are considerably lower than we're currently paying under the OUC contract. Now, I don't want to say that the OUC contract is a bad contract. Parties negotiated in good faith back in 2013 with eyes wide open and entered into it. What has changed, though, in the marketplace is that the market is significantly overbuilt in the state of Florida. And that's confirmed across every single utility that submits what's called a 10-year site plan to the Florida Public Service Commission. And if you look at them either individually or in aggregate, you can see that the marketplace is significantly long, meaning that the cost of capacity is probably half or more, or less than half of what was currently priced into our contracts. So the capacity component is coming down. We also know that the energy component is coming down. So, for example, the unit that we own a piece of, Stanton, for example, is going to show lower costs in the 2019 timeframe as coal costs come down because of renegotiation on contracts. Natural gas continues to obviously float with the market. There'll be some movement there. We'll be getting more kilowatts or megawatts out of units that we own. As Stanton goes through a re-rate, we'll have a little bit more. As St. Lucie doesn't have a refueling outage, it'll produce more. Therefore, we'll get more megawatts against our fixed costs. So we are projecting decrease in our unit costs going forward. So.
And other thoughts on how you can reach that number?
Well, starting in 2020, as we get a little bit further out, the power purchase agreement for solar will certainly create a tailwind for us. We'll be buying that at a discount to what we currently pay. So there's things that we're putting in place for 2019 and 2020, which will see these costs coming. I also think that we need to be very honest and candid with ourselves with regards to the fate of the existing power plant. We do need to get a second tie line in there. That's a significant expense that we can trade out. Retire that plant, consider retiring that plant. Now, we don't know the answer to the study yet, but I find it hard to believe that something that was built between 1968 and 1978 is going to be the key to the future. So we're probably going to take advantage of those lower prices in the market by getting a second tie line installed.
And on energy costs, Related to the contract, we factored in a percentage decrease that was fairly conservative. Do you remember what it was?
We talked about it. I don't know if it's reflected in the model.
5%?
Can you look at the power cost real quick? I think there's a $4 million drop from 18 to 19.
Based on just a projection on what he just said about on the power, those factors? Is that correct?
That is factored into these projections that we got from the Vantage consultant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're showing $36 million of cost in the current fiscal year going down to 31.4 next year.
Okay, Commissioner Maxwell?
Thank you. By the way, what color is that rabbit you're pulling out of your hat? I like rabbits.
It's cooked.
You know why? Because they reproduce. So while you can pull a rabbit out of your hat, I think what we're looking here, based on your comments and some, and some of the debt that we're not going to have in the next year or two, it seems to me we're looking at about a 1.5 year worth of a gap, a window that we have to figure out how to get through. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. If I'm looking at this independently, I would have to recommend that you do anything possible to preserve and possibly add to your fund balance in fiscal year 19.
So, my first response is, again, I love your buddy. Okay. A rate increase, as far as I'm concerned, is completely off the table right now. I think we need to just sharpen our pencils, consider reducing, if necessary, as a last resort, the contribution to the general fund. But I think there's some other options, and this is the first bite of the apple. This is our first look at this situation, and we could probably sit here all night and come up with different hypotheses. But I think it's time to move on to the water fund.
I can tell you that we are looking under every rock. Clyde just reminded me that we're out there getting ready to renegotiate our pole attachment fees to get some additional revenues there. And we do have the Stanton debt, a big chunk of Stanton debt that rolls off late in 2019. So we're doing a good job of reducing our controllable expenses. O&M is down in terms of salaries, and overtimes is down significantly below budget, certainly below last year.
And Madam, if I may follow up, so my final comment is, there's no need to panic here, boys and girls. This isn't a panic situation. We have good people looking into this, and we'll figure out a way. Thank you.
Commissioner Hardy?
Yeah, I mean, so how is it that we're gonna get to adding our fund balance in 2018? What did
2018?
Excuse me, in 2019? How did we decide that was gonna get done? Just now, without increasing rates?
Sharpen the pencils.
So one of the things that we'll do is we've been working very hard with Vantage, who's our consultant, helping us understand what we're paying for electric and working through the negotiations. So we'll be sharpening our pencil there. We'll also be looking much more closely at Stantec's model and our year-to-date numbers and where we project coming in at the end of the year, given that we've had a virtual hiring freeze in the utility, self-imposed. So we'll be looking much more closely at where we are year-to-date, where we project to come in at the end of the year, so the model can be fine-tuned. We'll have better numbers in the probably July timeframe as to where we think the market is going to bring us, what prices we'll see in the market, July, August timeframe, so we can plug that into the model. So we have a few more things coming that will help fine-tune it. So we just need more data. We'll have a better forecast of new revenues in terms of new meters that we'll be setting based on business that's already in the pipeline, those types of things.
What, if I may follow up? What I just heard is that we need a better model. Is that what I just heard?
No, I don't think we need a better model. I think we need to
Better numbers in the model.
get much
Better numbers in the
to the
model.
model, in fact, in terms of what we've done year to date and where we're forecasting to come in at the end of the year, which frankly Stantec doesn't know where we're forecasting to come in at the end of the year. So they're operating without that information. So we need to give them a much more detailed information than they have now. That's not, the magic year that's going to solve this problem, but it will make sure that they have numbers that are the latest as we see them, to fine tune it even further.
And that's going to.
I believe
you're shaking your head because in my mind I'm shaking my head, but that doesn't sound like an answer to the question that I asked. The question that I asked was, how do we, if you can put that that model up again,
It-
the question that I ask is, how do we avoid going from 2.9 months of reserves to 17 days of reserves, which is currently projected based on the assumptions that are built into the projection, quite obviously. And so, my question is, what happens here? Show us your plan to make that blue bar not go down from 2.9 months to 17 days. What is it that's going to happen between now and the end of the fiscal year that you believe is going to happen, or what additional information are we going to get that's going to make sure that doesn't happen again?
At this point, this is the data that we fed into Stantec's model. They're showing you very clearly we need to reduce expenses and try to increase revenues, or some combination thereof.
I'm asking for
The chart-
transparency as to the
No,
answer
you're
to that
asking
question.
for final answers
Sure.
in May. Is it still May? Yeah, I'm losing track of time. When we're just beginning a budget process to show you the issues we're grappling with as staff to balance these budgets. At this point in time, I don't think anybody's here prepared to give you final answers. It's too early in the process. This is intended to give you the snapshot of where we are right now. And you see that he has, and we all have in the city side of the equation here in the budget process, some large hurdles to overcome. Doesn't mean we can't. So give us now this period of time until the next presentation to start to close that gap. And it might not be as bad when we come back the next time.
May I ask, how long has staff known about the contents of this report?
We just met with Stantec
Friday afternoon.
last week, and we fed the model. We're just starting the budget process in earnest. And we'll go over the budget calendar that Corinne will present. So, and Ed, how long have you been here?
8 months. And
And you haven't solved this problem yet,
2 weeks. No, I have
okay?
not.
You need to get cracking. And I'm
just trying
joking.
to avoid creating a bigger problem. There are things that need to be done to make sure that, again, that our projection of where we're going to be at the end of the year is fed into the Stantec model, that it matches exactly what my staff thinks we're coming in at, because we're monitoring our numbers on a month-to-month basis. And again, we'll be in this rate negotiation with our suppliers to pick a supplier to get us into the next year. We're also, slammed the door pretty tight on non-discretionary spending. And I think you've seen the reaction of some of our employees with regards to, for example, overtime.
Yeah.
And how much we've cut back on overtime. We've cut over $160,000 out of overtime alone this year.
I want to laud you for that,
Yeah.
first of all, for having your eye towards that. This is something that we discussed previously in public memeetings and one-on-ones. And I'll say it's good to have a electric utility advisor that has a strong grasp of macroeconomics. I appreciate that. All right.
We clearly have a gap to close, and we're working hard to find that gap. And I think we have a much better understanding of those numbers today than we did certainly 8 months ago.
I'm
trying
going to
to get to the
refrain
answer.
my comments until the next budget cycle, but I would like to say that I would like to meet with you and you, stat.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, now on to the water fund. On the revenue side for fiscal year 17, the water revenues actually came in about $340,000 higher. A lot of that was due to the growth. We had not only growth in units, but we had growth in usage on both the residential and commercial. And so now starting in the fiscal year 18, what we have actually done is we have slightly brought down our residential growth from 2.3 to 2.2 percent increase on the commercial side, because we looked at historically how much commercial customers connections spike, whether up or down on an annual basis. We've just decided to be conservative and assume no growth for now on the commercial side. And so any kind of a growth that comes in will just be a surplus to the to overall revenues. And on the usage side, when we were looking at overall residential usage on a per unit and per month basis, we noticed that from 2006 or 2008 down to 2017, there was an average reduction in customer use of 1.5% per month per unit. So what we've done is we've actually added a slight conservatism into this projection by adding a reduction in fiscal year 18, 19, and 20 of about 1% per usage per unit per month. And so our total expected usage is now at about 1.26% versus the 2.1%. On the expense side, actual expenses came in lower for both O&M and personnel. There were some savings in defined benefits and standard overtime, and then equipment, legal, and contractual services. The fiscal year 18 budget now has slightly higher expenses for personnel and much lower expenses on the O&M side, savings due to wells, internal services, and fund equipment. However, this fund has a significant increase in capital projects, about $15 million in a 5-year period between fiscal year 2018 through 2022. And a lot of it, and most of it, from what I understand, is driven by this new roads initiative that the city of Lake Worth is currently under. So key challenges for this fund is maintaining a 4 months O&M balance in the bank. And right now, if we cash fund the full CIP as it stands, we would run out of funds by fiscal year 20. Also maintaining debt service coverage targets of 1.5% and ensuring the funding of this capital. Continued on the key challenges, the really big difference in this fund is really the $15 million of capital that has come on in the next 5 years. And what we're looking at as far as recommendation is, instead of cash funding all of these projects, we could maintain the 3% annual rate increases by essentially debt funding all of the projects that are larger than $1 million. And so that boils down to about $7 million of borrowing in fiscal year 19. And you could essentially maintain a 3%, either that, or you could look at a scenario where you would have to significantly change or increase your rates in fiscal year 19 and 20.
If they're cash funds.
If you're cash funding, exactly.
And just so you understand, when we look at utility funds, the funding of using debt as a mechanism to fund large-scale capital projects is not out of the realm of understanding or unheard of or even not recommended. You can see here on the panel, this is the current plan compared to last year in the green. As we showed, it goes negative into 2020 with a large level of additional capital projects in these early years, but that's assuming cash funding. If we debt funded all of the projects that are over $1 million, as Leticia just said, we let the model roll that through, issue a $7 million either bank loan or some sort of other long-term debt issuance next year, this would be a sustainable fund with the current rate plan of 3%. But that would be the only adjustment to the assumptions going forward, is assuming that debt service fund.
Commissioner Maxwell?
Vice Mayor was first.
You didn't mention anything about the repayment from the beach in this fund.
We are assuming the full repayment.
Yeah, that's a good point. We are assuming full payment from the beach fund in both 19 and 20, or 18 and 19, I'm sorry.
Okay, and remind us what that full payment is?
So it's a full payment out of the beach fund of $550,000 a year, and 2/3 of that goes into the water fund.
Okay, and I know the beach fund is next, so is that sustainable in that beach fund?
No.
Commissioner, I'm sorry, Commissioner Maxwell's first. He had his light on first, and he gave the floor over to the Vice Mayor.
Welcome what?
I figured you'd piggyback on what I just said.
Oh, no, I don't expect that money to be paid back anytime in my lifetime from the beach, but that's okay. That's all right.
No, it's not okay.
Mr. Maxwell, did you have some?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, just going back to, the issuance of debt for our capital projects. I see that you used a benchmark of maybe $1 million. There's a question, or statement, or I guess two questions. Number one, didn't the electric and and the water departments bond out for a lot of money?
Yes.
About 15 years ago?
Yes, sir.
And is there any of that money left?
No. Well, on the electric side, there is.
On the water side?
No.
Okay. So I guess my point is, why limit ourselves to, an arbitrary number of $1 million for a project? Why not just project to the next 5 or 10 years, given all the road work that we're doing and the infrastructure and the interest rates being so favorable? Why don't we just go out and bond out all of it up front and call it an afternoon?
That's
Yeah,
entirely
we-
a possibility that
Yeah.
would relieve the burden of cash funding these projects, and assuming the debt service would maintain your fund balance and allow for these rate increases to fund themselves.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Hardy?
I would agree. First of all, I'll go backwards. I agree with what Commissioner Maxwell said. The interest rate environment is favorable, and if we can bond it out 100% of the 15 million, then perhaps we should consider bonding out 100% of the 15 million. We won't get interest rates like this again. Let's hope that we don't get interest rates like this again in the near future. That would imply something negative about the macroeconomy.
Revenue bonds you're talking about.
Yes. The other.
I'm sorry. I was just gonna say, do you want to run that 15 million to see what, it's essentially doubling to see what kind of effects it would have? I mean, you're just gonna have a higher debt service cover or debt service, and then your coverage is gonna go down some. But I don't know if we can just like throw in an arbitrary, like an extra, I don't know.
I just want to slip in there that I did
Okay.
have that was a statement I guess I wanted on the record from my colleagues. I do have a question. You said that the water fund model, the assumptions in there include a full repayment of the loan to the beach fund, even though in the beach fund silo of this presentation, that's considered unsustainable. And so I guess the question is, we should probably
Figure it
take
out.
that out. Yeah, if it's not sustainable if it makes the beach fund unsustainable.
The effects to this fund are not significant. We ran a.
Yeah,
Oh.
you just got. Yeah,
He's like,
that's
don't
not
do it,
advisable.
don't do it.
Water utility director, it needs to be pointed out in the Inspector General's audit that beach fund was pointed out quite clearly.
Sure.
And it needed to be repaid.
What actual authority does so I read the Inspector General's report, and I frankly didn't. I felt like there was a misunderstanding. That loan was made from those funds via a more or less democratic process. Even though, well, look, there was some disagreements, but the fact is the people who were on the commission at the time, for better or worse, and we can have judgments about that, but the fact is there was a process that sent that money from the water fund and two other funds to the beach fund. So what the Inspector General said, I thought just kind of overlooked the fact that this was a decision made by an elected body. That said, let's say that doesn't get repaid annually, okay? Because the beach fund is frankly not sustainable if that gets repaid annually. What can the Office of the Inspector General do?
If I understand.
What practical consequences will result?
Corinne wants to give.
Okay, Corinne, you haven't had a chance to talk tonight.
Okay, the biggest problem with the loan and the OIG is there was no written formal documentation. Every year during the budget process, you guys as policy decision makers make the decision while we're going through this, that this year we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna pay back 100,000, or we're gonna pay back 250,000. Which is perfectly acceptable, but we really should be bringing it forth as a resolution and changing the terms of the repayment. It is a policy decision whether or not that loan gets paid back, whether or not that loan gets forgiven. As long as we dot our I's, cross our T's, follow the proper procedures, there are no issues.
It's creating policy publicly about how the terms of the loan are going to be set and adjusted. And this organization never did that formally. And we never formally. We did it in the budget process on the fly.
We did it.
And
we
were right to point out that's not the proper way to do it.
Okay.
There should be policy.
Okay. So I guess my question is though, I mean, back to the whether or not this gets included in the projection, it should probably, regardless of the process, it should probably not be included because it does not appear that and we'll get to that.
We just
Do
ran
one
a
fund at
scenario.
Let's stay one fund at a time here, folks.
They're connected.
Well, we just ran a scenario where we basically excluded those transfers. And so what that does now is it adds about 0.5 percentage point rate increase every year to the water fund. So you're moving from the 3% up to the 3.5% every year.
This is still assuming you would debt fund these projects starting next year. So your answer is about 0.5% if
And-
that transfer just goes away completely for them.
And remember too, that the rate situation you're in was set by previous commissions when the money was borrowed and invested and the water plant was built and the projections were 5% a year.
No,
Yeah,
no, the
yeah.
projections were, when we got here, no increases for all the years prior when we weren't here, and then they kicked in 2015
Right.
at 5 and
At
8,
5%.
10%.
Correct. And
So they gave them no increases for an X amount of year period, and then chose to increase them
We got
a decade later, just for history's sake.
Brilliant.
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 But the point is, we haven't been doing 5% increases. We've been able to do all the work and investments, and it's been an amazing set of circumstances that has been good, but we haven't had to do the 5% a year.
And last year we had a 2.75, which is a little lower than what we're looking at now.
Right.
So just to package the answers for you. Last year, we had recommended a 3% rate plan going forward for the water fund. That rate plan could still hold. The difference between this year's and last is the higher level of capital, and we would assume that some of it would be debt funded next year to maintain that rate plan. If the beach transfer were to be eliminated altogether, the rate plan would have to be 3.5% to sustain the water fund rather than 3.
And we can't see the modeling as to whether or not we did it all, one borrowing through the revenue bonds?
We are assuming one set of borrowing in fiscal year 19 to fund the level of projects needed over the next few years.
Okay. Mr. Maxwell?
My question is related to that. Brian, first of all, it's too bad that Ed's not here, so I can kind of poke fun at him and say, gee, you did such a great job with your department, Ed, what's the matter? You know, but I'll catch him in the hall next time. Did he? Okay.
Sure.
The $15 million that you're looking at in capital, that's only for 2 years? Is that what I'm hearing?
It's for a 5-year period from 18 to 22.
Does that get us through the whole road
Yes.
up? So $15 million makes us whole and puts us where we need to be.
It's a combination of the hydraulic improvements for fire protection and the 2-inch steel line replacement.
So anything we could
Both of those big initiatives are included.
Is there anything out there on our wish list or our capital improvement plan that is not included in the $15 million?
Not really. It's, if you look at the chart that Eric's got up there, it's kind of a spike in the first 3 years, and then it levels off to a range of about $3 million a year, which is just more or less R&R type projects that we've got on the
So
books.
this $15 million then really is going to pretty much bring us
Make us whole.
into the 21st century?
Yes.
So we'll have comparable.
All major improvements will be done at both the water
Okay.
plant and the distribution system.
Okay, good, thanks.
I have a question. When you showed the initial numbers before we went to the modeling, you showed that residential usage was up and commercial usage was up. And where on the electric funds, residential usage was down and commercial usage was down. Do they normally, just asking, don't they normally parallel one another? If you're looking at new units and is that an anomaly or?
New meters.
Really difficult to say. There's so many factors that can go into why one may use less electricity but more water, and so
You also have different service areas. They don't overlap
That's
directly.
a key point, and don't forget we incorporated into the system Lake Osborne Estates, which immediately brought in 466 units.
Right.
So there's a difference
Correct.
in us versus the electric utility and units coming in.
Okay.
But Leticia did make a good point that your usage per account is still declining, and it has been since fiscal year 2006, and that's consistent across the nation.
Mhm.
You see, as water efficiencies are being gained in the households, people are trying to save money on their own, installing more efficient fixtures, being more conscious of the water they put on the lawn. That's not a unique trend here. But despite that, you're still seeing growth in your overall usage.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
All right, so I guess we're ready for the beach fund.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So same approach on the revenue side. On the beach fund, we had an additional $54,000 of revenue versus the projection last year. Some of that growth came in from the other operating revenues and facility rentals and then higher lease tenant revenues. Going forward and for fiscal year 18, we're basically matched to staff's estimate. And so what the estimate now does is it's basically flat compared to fiscal year 17, but it's a slight reduction from last year's projection. So again, we're just adding a little bit more conservatism to all of these funds. And so part of the reduction versus the comparison to last year's model is that meter parking of 160,000. that we've just basically said, okay, well, the parking, or staff, I guess, said the parking meters were about 1.6 million in this year, and so we're projecting just about 1.6 million in 18. And then we've got a slight increase in the lease, tenant, and facility rental revenues. On the expense side, in this fund, there were significant savings on personnel expenses due to, I think, from what I understand, some attrition possibly. And the savings came out of the regular salary and part-time salaries. And on the O&M side, there were some savings as well, about $170,000. So what happened is you had a little bit higher revenue and then a lot lower expenses than projected. The fiscal year 18 includes lower personnel expenses of, again, about $240,000, which is significant versus the projection last year. And some of those savings are in the life and health insurance. And then lower O&M of about $127,000 due to savings in equipment, general and legal costs. To answer Commissioner Omarosa's questions from earlier, we have assumed the full $550,000 payment out of this casino beach fund, or I'm sorry, the beach fund, going forward from 18 on. And so we can toggle out the payments down to 0 and see what that does to the projection. Next. So the key challenges of this fund are essentially we ended up the fiscal year 17 with higher fund balances than we projected because we had a slight increase in revenues, and then we had a much lower reduction in revenues. We are forecasting the same kind of trend now for 18, but when you look out 10 years, you still have cash outflows higher than cash inflows, and so you still have a gap that you need to bridge. And so we're projecting that your fund balance by the end of fiscal year 19 will go down to 0.
And this is without the operation of the pool.
That's correct. Yes, that's without everything related to the pool. And so the recommendations are to reduce costs, increase potentially the parking rates, or a combination of the two.
So essentially the same story as last year, but just you
Pushed
bought
out.
yourself a year.
Yep.
Same story, but worse.
Oh no, the story's the same. We just pushed out some because of the savings and costs.
You can see here last year with the green bars, we had projected by the end of fiscal year 18 the fund would be out of reserves, but that was preserved due to all of the cost savings and higher levels of revenues, but the trend will still continue without action.
So that's the current model?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, so the blue bars are what you're looking at as today. So I guess what Eric was pointing out is just the higher operating reserves in 17 and 18 due to the cost savings. And I think one thing maybe we could potentially monitor is that reduction in the debt payments, Eric, since we consider that on the water fund.
Sure. So let's talk about that.
Sort of looks like we're hanging our laundry.
$550,000 total payment. If we assumed starting next year that goes away, or should I start this year? Is that a done deal in fiscal year 18 is really my question. Okay, so if it's 100,000 in fiscal year 18 and 0 going forward, calculate the model. That could do it.
Eric, what does leaving the payment in and increasing parking to 250 look like?
Leaving it in at 550?
Mm-hmm.
So let's reset that. And what did you want to adjust?
Raise the parking to, because currently it's $2, raise it to 250.
250, oops, not 250, 50 cents. That would also do it.
That would do it also. So your options are either.
Does that work with the fiscal year 18 at 550,000?
For a combination.
Good question, Lakeith. It would do it. You would just have depleted fund balance. We're showing the minimum requirement of about $1 million. You would be just shy of $400,000 by the end of fiscal year 19, and then build that up over time if cost escalation rates were to maintain and your revenue did come in at that rate. Just to play with these numbers here, if you just cut this in half and still keep some level of transfer going in and increase your parking rates, you'd be looking at a much more sustainable fund, and then probably by fiscal year 2021, you could bring that back up to $550,000. I'm just playing with these right here, just trying to adjust on the fly. So you could kind of calibrate your understanding of the options here.
Would then add in operations of the pool or an aquatic area.
This is assuming the pool stays off. Yes.
That's the assuming the pool stays closed.
Yeah, the current level of your budget.
It also doesn't take into account the discussion you're going to have about the options for investing in some reconfiguration at the casino, creating some more space and maybe some aquatic features and additional parking. So all that hasn't been even talked about yet until you get to later in the year.
Commissioner Robinson?
I'm interested in raising the parking rates on a varying basis, the upper level versus the lower level, holidays, versus midweek. We spend $120,000 on new meters, and do they have the ability to adjust on a daily basis?
Larry. Hi, they're like the parking enforcement manager. Yes, they do. We could raise whichever ones we want to, whenever we want each new. They're very, very intuitive.
Flexible.
Yes, and flexible.
So we could do that
could,
tomorrow.
yes, if we wanted to. Well, no, that's after we get the meters in. We don't put them in yet. They're coming next month.
All right.
Okay.
All right, I'll wait a minute. But we can, I don't know when we're gonna decide about raising the parking rates, but I wish we would do it sooner rather than later.
Commissioner Maxwell?
Sure. One thing's for sure, we start tinkering around with the parking rates and, well, it's this much this day and that much the following day. We're gonna be confusing people till there's no understanding of reality here. And we're just, you are really making a very dangerous leap if you think that you're gonna start tinkering with parking rates and that's not gonna have a negative impact on the revenue on the beach. Okay? I could be wrong, but we still haven't done a complete study as to where our beachgoers come from. The assumption is most of them come from out of town, but we don't know that for sure. We have a lot of assumptions going up there on the beach fund, so I'm not in favor of raising the parking rates to pay off a debt that should have been thought through a little bit more carefully. Well, the question I have for staff is how much we actually pay back of the $6 million loan? Anybody know?
I'm not sure off the top of my head. I do know we did the full payment last year. The year before, I want to say 250. The year before, I want to say it was also 250.
So we're probably,
Making half payments up till last year. We did a full payment last year.
so easy to say we're $1 million behind probably, at least.
Yeah.
At least $1 million behind. Well, the only reason I bring it up is because as you look at the modeling, I think you have to go back to the out years, 28, 27, 26, and back those numbers out because there's not going to be that debt service necessary. You see what I'm saying?
You paid off earlier.
It's already, well, I'm saying at 550, which is what we're supposed to pay.
There's 500 towards this one. There's an operational loan also in the capital project fund where $50,000 goes.
Right. So at 550, if we've already paid, let's say $1 million, well, maybe it does go out that
10 years would give you $5.5 million at that rate.
Do you think we paid $1 million yet?
So
Okay. All right. Well, maybe it's a little. All right. Very well. All right. I just want to say I think we're making a big mistake if you think you're going to fix all our ills by raising the parking rates. That's the easy way out.
It's part of it.
Commissioner Hardy?
In the past, I've said that I was concerned about not knowing the price and elasticity of parking at the beach. What I'll say is that while I still don't know the price elasticity of the beach, I am more comfortable today than I was a year ago with raising the parking rates. I would like to see something done based on, you know, a sort of a study. Now, this wasn't done at a large amenity, but for example, in San Francisco, what they did was they studied, you know, how people park on a day-to-day basis and figured out what they could price parking at to create a certain outcome. I'm sure that there's something that we can do like that at the beach to try and figure out, you know, what are times where we really don't want to charge people more? What are times and days that we could get away with charging people more? I would feel more comfortable if a study like that were done before we implemented a parking rate increase. But I think given the what we see here, it has to at least look. We only got 3 options. We can reduce costs, Lord knows how, and there are some costs that are going to be there in the future. You know, whatever we do with the aquatic center is going to increase our costs. And I want to thank Doug and I want to thank Lauren. You guys went around with me all around Palm Beach County looking at aquatic facilities. Not one of them broke even, actually. The closest one that broke even was the one in Royal Palm Beach, which has a footprint that I don't think our residents would accept at the beach. And so whatever we have there, whether it's a pool or a splash pad or whatever, is going to lose a 6-figure sum. That's not included in this projection. So unless we're going to not repay the loan from the water capital self-insurance funds, unless we're going to magically reduce costs, we have to look at the parking rates. Like, I don't like it, but it has to be on the table as far as the things that we do. So, you know, I think we should study it in some way. You know, I'm not saying, you know, we have to go with a full Toyota, you know, Harvard MBA style study of, you know, what's going on there, but I'm sure we can figure out, you know, Sundays we can get away with, or Saturdays we can get away with more. Monday nights we probably shouldn't charge anything, or you know, charge more than what we're charging right now. I think that needs to be done, and I think we need to look at, unfortunately, increasing the parking rates at the beach.
I just find it's ironic that whenever I go to the beach, I can't find a parking spot anywhere. And in fact, I know that many people that go to the beach, they're parking in the decal parking areas, and they don't care about getting a ticket there either. They just want to find a parking space because they can't find a parking space, just like me. So I don't, you know, that speaks to the fact of needing more parking at the beach itself. It speaks to possibly a change in, you know, a change in policy. The only thing that I worry about is, you know, everyone wants to park closest to the beach. So yes, I understand what Commissioner Robinson was talking about, but then that also penalizes the people that are up on the top and that are, as opposed to on the, I mean, it just, you know, I don't know if within our businesses, if it will work. I'm not quite sure. I don't like the sound of any of it. I always hate this fund, so.
Can I just wanted to add just 2
I wasn't
other
responsible
items.
for the planning. I just got the thing open.
We have in this projection right here, we also have an expense in fiscal year 19 for a pier maintenance, which we are set up to toggle in and out. And we have a bus shelter included in the CIP. Again, I think for fiscal year 18 or 19. Those are just topics that we discussed internally, and I'm not sure if you all wanted to toggle it in or out, but I'm essentially saying the projection, the way we're looking at it right now, includes both of those expenses.
Yes, the bus is something I've been working on with the county and Commissioner Kerner, and yes, in order to bring the bus back to the beach, we need some kind of a bus, and I know that we had it in the budget prior, so I'd like to keep it in the budget because that needs to happen.
It'll alleviate parking.
Absolutely, and just to piggyback, you know, if we are moving forward with a parking increase, I agree with Commissioner Maxwell that it might be a little confusing to change pricing on different days and different times and different, it's a little confusing to people when they get to the beach and they don't know what they're paying or when they're paying. And, you know, some of them use the apps, you know, I don't know how that works, Larry, with the apps, you know, I guess when you get there, it's whatever price it is that day or that time.
Right. I mean, we can set them at whatever you want. okay?
Weekday weekends is usually the easiest. Of
Right.
Weekday
some,
weekends.
Some people do,
as
some
opposed
people don't. Like you said, it's a little bit confusing sometimes, especially people out of town do come.
Yeah.
You get to consider
Spring
that.
break, Memorial
Right.
Day, Labor Day.
Things like that. But yet they can pay by Park Mobile. That's an app. It's a national company that we contract with, and they can always use that too.
And the last thing is, depending on what we do with the actual beach project as we look moving forward, you know, the building's going to need more maintenance. You know, it's there's a lot of issues that we keep tabling on the maintenance because, or Lauren's up there with a spray can of paint. You know, when I say how come everything's peeling, she can't continue to do that. Staff can't continue to do that. There needs to be, you know, an overall maintenance, whether we're moving forward with something else or not.
So in the projection, as we look at it right now, again, it's also including that 50% or 50 cents increase in the parking rate in this current scenario. We also have $100,000 of what would be renewal and replacement. Now, I can't tell you for sure if that's enough. That would probably be something the staff would have to make sure to give us more direction, but that's essentially what we have right now is $100,000 every year of renewal replacement.
And what about the rental on the building that you're currently using for staff? That should have been income coming in now that we've alleviated the flooding issues. Or have we alleviated the flooding issues? That's another stuff.
I don't think that that's represented in our budget yet, unless I am mistaken.
None of those configurations about building out that space, leasing it out, none of that's in this. This is current configuration.
Well,
Where are you going to put staff?
That's part of what the
business model
study
is
we're
that-
going through is going to give you options on how to correct those issues and get those spaces resolved.
Oh, okay. I thought you were just
Yeah.
talking about the pool space for that. You're talking about the second floor.
It's to finish the
Retail space
casino
that was-
building, find place for staff and storage and all the things that were missing that got value engineered out, as well as addressing what to do with the pool and parking.
Okay.
So if,
Commissioner Robinson?
I certainly think that if we change the parking rates, we could change them back just as easily. If the statistics or the data showed it. And I really, for the life of me, don't understand the confusion that has been mentioned. I don't know, I really don't know anybody that prices their parking. You know, they go there because it's the beach. They don't go because it's $2 or $2.50. There's more confusion in how to operate the meter than how much they're paying. I never heard anybody mention, geez, this is $2, that's too much. And you know, it's there. I don't know why we're looking for money. It's the only place that we can get money right now. I don't know what the hesitation is to even try it. I think it's foolish not to address the income that we're losing. That we could vary. Of course, we could study it for another 6 months at maybe $30,000, but I'd rather not. I'd rather make a decision and get some income from the parking.
Do we know what the numbers are when you talk about the revenue generated from the parking is what? How much?
about $1.6 million, I think, from the metered parking. Oh.
Serious.
1.6. And do we have a breakdown as to the dollars when we talked about weekday, weekend
Holidays.
of how many spaces? You know, what are our actual numbers?
We have to do a sheet for you to be able to consider it. And the next meeting, something like that.
The next budget meeting when we go through this fund?
Well, we're going to need to know when we talk about penny sales tax and the possibility of a structure. So we're going to need to know it.
We're gonna need to know everything about parking. Okay, and yeah. Commissioner Hardy?
I'll just before I get into my questions, I'll just do a drive-by slap of the county charter. We talk about that bus shelter. Too bad impact fee money can't be spent on mobility options. Which we're not going to go there. Look,
And
you know
where are we
what?
gonna put it?
My personal experience is that you go to the beach and you get there
Before the plan of the.
and then you walk up to the parking meter knowing you're going to get hit, right? And I don't think there are going to be people who are going to walk up to the parking meter based on what we're paying, charging them right now, that are going to get hit so hard that they're just going to walk away. And if that's true, what we're saying is that basically we're charging them the upper limit of what we can charge, which is basically saying that there's no excess demand. If we're charging the upper limit, that means that there's nobody driving around our parking lot looking for parking spaces, but there is. And so that is evidence that there's some room to go. There is a danger of overshooting it, right? It's like there's a price that is greater than what we're charging right now, that is less than an amount that will cause people to go away. And we could find that price if we experiment, which we can do. I imagine it's not too difficult. And my understanding is in other cities, and Larry, you're the expert, other cities have demand-based pricing where people go to certain areas of the city and they don't know what they're going to charge, but the fact is they got to go to those areas of the city. You got to go to downtown San Francisco, you got to go to wherever. And the fact is you're going to pay whatever they're asking you to pay within reason, because you got to go there. And I think our beach is one of the few things, frankly, in Palm Beach County that is absolutely that way. There and people got to go to the beach. It's Florida. They're going to go to the beach, and that they're just going to factor that into the cost of whatever it is that they do there. I do think though that we should probably figure that out with some sort of even if it's informal, like we're going to notate everything for 30 days and figure out what days are better or worse. Okay. The next thing is future plans at the beach. My prediction is that no plan that we come up with is going to reduce costs at the beach. That's just it seems to me that all of the politically feasible plans are not going to reduce costs at the beach. So I would be very keen on doing what we can to increase revenue via the parking lever. The other thing is, and this is something that we discussed last year, I want to make sure I have the number right. For some reason, I have in my head that the annual value of the space that staff uses in rent is around $330,000. That if we rented that space out for top dollar, we would get that. Is that right, or is that totally off base? Have we done a study to see what the?
Yeah, it's half.
It's half of that. Okay.
You
Okay.
overshot it a little bit.
Okay. Okay. So $15 a square times how many square feet?
5,000.
It's cheap.
They pay more for that on Lake Avenue in Lucerne.
Yeah, that's cheap.
Why are we $15 a square?
Second floor.
Access issues. There was a lot of shared with the ballroom.
Proposals were coming at $8 a square.
Yeah.
And also remember that we charge patio rent plus camp, so it's 15 on rent. Juan Rez, assistant city manager for the record. The 15 on rent, another $15 a square for patio rent, and then the additional cam charge as well, and plus they have to pay their share of the property tax as well. So when you do all that and you try to back into a triple net rent, it's
What's the whole dollars per square with everything in?
Depends on how much they pay.
no.
That's gotta be a number.
There's a void of rent somewhere between $150,000 to $200,000 that we're not realizing by not renting that out. And
Well, I mean, when I lease an office space, I know what it is. I work it out. I know what the rent is. I know what the triple net is. I know what everything. I know what it is per square. So if I had 5,000 square feet and I wanted the outside square feet that surrounded that, I just want that one space. What's my number? Can we get that later?
well, I can give you the inside number for sure, but I can't give you the outside patio because that can vary. Not all the tenants use patio space, so every single one, everyone's revenue is different.
No. I'm saying I want to know just that one space, not now, just in the future. I want to know just that one space maxed out. I want all the patio space I can have. I want it inside. I want to know what the max revenue that 5,000 square feet
And we
can
can run
generate.
that calculation.
With everything in, with triple net in and everything.
When you say $15 a square foot, you talking about annually, or you're talking about
Per square foot annually.
okay? And all right, because You know, when I did that times 12, that didn't work out too well.
Remember, we received unsolicited proposals that were coming in at $7-8 a square.
Yeah, but that's not what the case of our traffic volume is now at the beach,
Fair
and that
enough.
can be evaluated 3 years after the time when we're actually, you can't.
5 years ago.
Vice Mayor?
And if you're gonna get that information for the mayor, can you also back it up? And I know that it's gonna go into all the other conversations we're gonna have, but if we're talking about renting that space, we need to talk about who's in that space now, what their function is, how much it would cost us to put them somewhere else, how much it would cost us to rent and or do something for tables, chairs, how much it would cost us per event to get those tables and chairs back up to the top.
What's CAM?
It's about for sakes, call it $12.50 a square.
Can we say what exactly is CAM?
Common area
It's our
maintenance.
common area
Okay.
maintenance. Hallways, bathrooms, light bulb.
So you're looking at 1250 plus 15, so that's 2750 a square.
Right.
Cumulative, when you stack it all.
Yeah.
Well, we occupy the space. We pay all the.
Well, the city's not paying itself rent, and it's not paying itself CAM. You know, we're occupying the spaces.
Okay.
Can I just say that we can have this conversation when we get the consultants, and then we can talk about public-private partnerships and a lot of other things at a later, other meeting.
He said that publicly.
What?
Private partnership.
Commissioner Hardy, did you just, would you like to?
No, it just looks like we have.
Just gonna leave it on.
Yeah, sorry. It's like my signal. I get in trouble. Well, not I get in trouble, but somebody chastises me repeatedly. I'm not going to say who for keeping my signal on after I get over. Sorry about the light.
I just don't want to miss you.
Yeah, it just looks like we have relatively few levers. So we got costs, we got parking rates, we got not repaying the loan, which increases the burden on every single ratepayer here in the city. I don't know how palatable that is. And we got increasing revenue by using the staff space, but staff then has to have a place to go. We can't do that without having an overall different plan. The only option we have is increasing parking rates, seemingly. Or we can just throw up our hands and, you know, who knows?
I think we all got it. All right, you want to come up and give us the budget calendar, Missy?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Corinna Elliott, Interim Finance Director for the record. Okay, our next meeting is going to be on June 26th with Stantec back. We'll be going over the general fund at that time. We'll also be looking at the regional sewer, stormwater, solid waste, and reviewing again the electric, the water, and the beach. On July 17th, we're
You're gonna do all that again? Everyone on staff will be ready after this tonight to go and have everything that we need to go through all those new funds and these funds?
We're gonna see as much as we can do on the recaps. We're definitely gonna hit the new funds, and we'll make it through as much as we can.
Okay.
Okay? On July 17th, we are going to have just a regular meeting. We're going to actually adopt the tentative millage and all of that stuff. And then on August 28th, we're going to do a budget work wrap-up session. And the first reading will be September 13th, and the second reading will be September 25th. And that is no conflicts with the counties. So those are pretty solid dates.
Okay, I don't want to have to extend past 10 o'clock, but I do have one question for you. We're going back over these funds and we're looking back. So let's say we talked about electric and we had a lot of discussion about the electric funds especially. And we should have. With that said, I mean, what decisions are we going to be making next time that we couldn't make today? What's going to be, I mean, are you going to be ready to come back at that time and do it? And are we going to be making I mean, this is early in the budget process. We're going to be making final decisions on the final wrap-ups of these budgets within 2 sessions as opposed to the 30 or whatever we normally
No, there's gonna be a total of 4 budget work sessions. So you will have other times to bring it back. It'll just be of any other new data. Ed is currently working with the electric. So if there's updates to it, that's what they would be reviewing at that point in time.
Okay, I just want to make sure
Yeah.
everyone's going to be ready.
Everyone's
to
gonna
come back and revisit what was discussed tonight at that next one. Because we
Correct.
have all new funds to discuss next time. Just keep that up, think about that.
No, I know.
All right, Mike too, just think about it. think we'll be able to tackle that all in one?
He says no.
No, I don't think so either. Sorry, years of experience, I think you're probably better off looking at this.
Okay, and if we need to
Yeah.
push some of them to the other stand, they're gonna be here 4 times.
I just want to make sure that staff has enough time to go through everything
Okay, that's fine.
and do what they need to do before we come back again and revisit it, because we'll be starting to make decisions.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconded. All those in favor, state so by saying aye. Aye. Good night, everyone.